Welcome to the enchanting world of Bella Brown's historical Western romance. I'm delighted to share this journey with you today. Before we ride into the story, if you enjoy these narrations, please consider subscribing to this channel. It's a small gesture that makes a big difference, and your support makes it possible to continue bringing these heartfelt tales to listeners everywhere, completely free of charge. Now find yourself a comfortable spot, close your eyes if you wish, and allow your imagination to travel back to the American frontier, where adventure and romance await. This audiobook presentation features The Bride's Promise by Bella Brown, all rights reserved. Epilogue. Outside, the thunderstorm raged. Wind howled through the cracks in the windows, causing the panes to rattle in the frames as the relentless drumming of the rain pounded against the roof. Sporadic bursts of lightning cast a ghostly flickering light that danced across the rows of narrow, iron-framed beds. Not a candle was left lit in the dormitory as the rain trickled down the inside of the walls. Not even a rat dared venture out. Each clap of thunder sent tremors through the floorboards, and the children huddled deeper in their beds, seeking security under their thin, itchy woolen blankets. "It's okay," Mary Patrick whispered. "Ma always said a storm is just God moving his furniture around." Jessie Driscoll squeezed her eyes shut tighter still. "I don't like it." Mary cuddled up to her in the tiny bed. "I'm here now. What if Miss Redding comes in? You'll be in for a good hiding again if she catches you in here with me." Mary's fiery temper often meant that her mouth would run away with her. Jessie hated it when Mary had a beating with the cane that the mean owner carried. Often, Mary was protecting Jessie or another of the younger girls. "Ah, she doesn't scare me," Mary said lightly. A reluctant smile pulled on Jessie's lips. Miss Redding ran the orphanage with an iron fist. She had a stern gaze and a rigid posture that could strike fear into the heart of any child who called this place home. "Do you think she's scared of a storm too?" Mary snorted. "She probably scares the devil spitless, mean old witch that she is." Jessie covered her mouth to disguise the laughing snuffle. There were other children awake at this dark hour. She could hear the whimpers whenever the thunder boomed, but Mary had chosen her to comfort tonight. For as long as she could remember, Mary had been by her side. The girls were the same age, and yet Mary was her protector. The Patrick family had lived along the same filthy floor in the dank building as the Driscolls. It didn't matter that the Patricks all had red hair and Irish brogues. So did many other families who were crammed into the tenements along York Avenue. Matthew Driscoll had tried to keep up with his life after Jessie's mom had died, trying to bring another Driscoll into the world. Then, one day, Matthew hadn't returned home either. Jessie had been suddenly left alone. Jessie didn't have many memories of her family. She'd been taken in by the Patricks, even though they barely had a morsel to spare themselves. Mary's mother had been kind and sweet, even as the disease ravaged her body. Then it was just Jessie and Mary left, scavenging on the streets, trying to survive. Mary always blamed herself for them being caught by the police. When no one came forward to claim the girls, they'd ended up at the Hopeful Light orphanage. "We'll be old enough to leave here one day," Mary whispered. "We'll get jobs in a factory, and we can eat cake every day. You can make me a dress that is as blue as the sky on a fine summer's day." "I want a green dress," Jessie replied softly, the images dancing through her mind. "And you'll look grand wearing it, Jessie Driscoll. We'll have a big house just to ourselves. Girls can't live alone. We need a man to buy the house for us. My papa paid the bills." "Fine," Mary allowed. "We'll each have ourselves a good husband living with us. They'll be hardworking and handsome as you like." "What if they don't like each other? What kind of best friend do you take me for?" Mary snuggled in closer to her. "No husband of mine will think badly of you. Any man who doesn't like you won't be worthy of my time. My babies will call you Aunt Jessie, and yours will call me Aunt Mary. And they will always be friends, just like us." "That's right." "What if," Jessie's throat tightened with emotion, "what if I die like my ma did? I don't want my children to grow up without a mom. I couldn't bear it." Cocooned in the shadows beneath the blanket, Mary lifted her head off the bed. "Jessie, your ma didn't leave you because she wanted to. God's calling was stronger. That's all. Jessie blinked against the hot tears, and she nodded. She ached for a mother as much as she did for a family. It was a notion that bonded the friends deeply. Besides, your babies will never go without a mother, not as long as there is breath in my body. I'll be their mother. Storm forgotten, Jessie smiled sweetly, and I will be for yours. Promise? I promise. Chapter 1. It's been nearly 5 months and not a word, Jessie Driscoll said. The factory room was shrouded in perpetual gloom. No natural light passed through the windows that were high up in the walls around the eaves, the glass choked out by the black smoke that billowed over the city. Conversation was strictly forbidden, but the women who filled the seats on the factory floor had learned to communicate in hushed whispers, their words barely audible above the relentless hum of the machinery. "This isn't the first time this has happened, Jessie," Annie said. "Remember when she first left? Settling in took her a while." "Then there was a delay after she had little Molly," Gwen reminded her. "Well, that was because they'd had that harsh winter," Annie said. Mary's letter mentioned that nobody could get in or out of the town for weeks on end. Both women were older, their faces lined with years of hardship, but their spirits remained unbroken. Jessie knew that her work colleagues were simply trying to reassure her, but their words did little to ease the gnawing feeling of dread that was tightening with each passing day that she hadn't heard from Mary. Ever since Mary had left for Montana, she'd written at least once a month. Sometimes the letters had been short. Mary had tried explaining that life with a lumberjack was busy, but Jessie had never left New York, so she could only try and imagine Mary's new home through her words. "Something is wrong," she said after a moment, laying hands across her stomach. "I feel it in here." "It was probably that soup we ate at lunchtime," Annie remarked, and a smattering of laughter followed. "Listen, the lot of you need to keep it down and quit your yakking," Louise said bitterly. "I'm not having my wages docked again because Jessie can't keep her mouth shut." Jessie glowered at Louise, who had filled Mary's chair opposite when she'd gone west 7 years ago to marry Larkin Spriggs. It had taken Jessie time to get used to not seeing the twinkling green gaze across the workbench. It had taken even longer to get used to not speaking to Mary Patrick every day, and deep down, she knew that part of the ache inside was because she missed her best friend. Her gaze drifted to the platform to her left, which allowed the miserly foreman, Mr. Waddington, a bird's-eye view of the factory floor. It was currently empty. With a scowl permanently etched onto his face, he ensured that the factory was more like a prison than a place of work. Jessie's usual snarky comeback to grouchy Louise was absent. "Leave her alone," Gwen told Louise. "You never met Mary, but she was like a sister to Jessie, the only family the girl has ever known." Jessie's eyes stung a little over the tender words, and she blinked to focus on her sewing machine, her nimble fingers swiftly sewing seams on endless yards of fabric. Gwen put an arm around her shoulders and gave her a reassuring squeeze before she returned to her work. She understood the close bond that Jessie shared with Mary better than anyone. Gwen had taken them both under her wing and had shown them the way on their first day at the factory. Mary hadn't wanted to work at the factory. She'd argued that each of them earning $2 a day wouldn't be enough to cover the week's rent and a meal a day, but they'd made do. The days were arduous, but working in the factory would always beat living at the orphanage, and Mrs. Redding made Mr. Waddington look like a teddy bear. They had to be out of bed at 5 and on the factory floor by 7, where they stayed until 6 at night. They had a short break at midday for a watery soup or stew. They'd found a room high in the attic of a building across town and had built a life together, even though, when they'd left the orphanage, Mrs. 7%. Redding had predicted that they'd each be down at the docks, earning a coin, like all bad girls ended up doing before the end of the year. The women here had become like an extended family, until Mary Patrick had taken the notion that she wanted a husband and children, and she'd started writing to a man she'd never met out west. "Waddington is an old goat who won't hear a thing over the clatter of these machines," Annie said to Louise, but she'd lowered her voice just in case. Louise pulled a face of disbelief. He has better hearing than a bat. Jessie sighed as the muted squabble continued around the other three. The bench ran the length of the interior of the clothing factory, and there were two more long lines of tables fitted into the shop floor. Each wooden table had 4 sewing machines bolted to the tops. The cacophony of clattering machines filled the air, drowning out the thoughts of the workers who toiled under the watchful eye of Mr. Waddington. Gwen, her eyes filled with empathy, tried to console Jessie. "Don't fret, dear. Life out west can be fraught with dangers, but Mary is strong. I'm sure she's doing just fine." "Gwen's right," Annie murmured. "Mary Patrick is feisty enough for any man out west." The hushed reassurances did little to ease Jessie's anxiety. The machines ran all day, which usually meant that the hours raced past. The women had to keep the machines whirring and have their work inspected, lest Mr. Waddington or one of his subordinates dock their wages. Today, though, Jessie struggled to keep her mind on the task. Twice, Gwen pinched her thigh sharply to bring her attention back to the job, and when she glanced over at the walkway, Mr. Waddington was out on watch, inspecting them all like a hawk seeking out the weakest prey. By the time they all stepped through the factory doors, the sun was pooling into the horizon, casting its dying embers across the Hudson River that softened the harsh lines of the industrial landscape. The bitter tang of the tannery blended in the air with the pungent aroma of rotting trash, and the occasional street vendor hawking roasted meats and chestnuts on street corners. Jessie walked with the other factory workers through the thoroughfares toward home, her heart heavy with worry. Warehouses changed to brownstones. Jessie imagined the families gathering around the dining tables within the modest buildings, the aroma of home-cooked meals filling the place as the candlelight danced against the walls that she could see through the windows. Elegant ladies, adorned in the latest Parisian fashions, strolled along the sidewalks, enjoying the warm spring evening with their parasols and lace gloves. They kept their eyes averted as they passed by Jessie and the other women in their shabby brown dresses. Their escorts, clad in well-tailored suits and top hats, were engaged in animated conversations and didn't spare any ragged factory worker a glance. Horse-drawn carriages clattered over the cobblestones, their hooves echoing through the air as they navigated the maze of gas-lit narrow lanes. One by one, the other factory workers broke away from the group until there was just the youngest or the poorest left, who were heading to the old brewery, to Mulberry Bend or beyond. Made up of brick and wood buildings, 5 Points was a melting pot of accents and nationalities, crammed together in an area known for deviants, thieves, and prostitutes. The grubby brick buildings leaned against its neighbor, their patched windows as broken as the people crammed inside them. Immigrants, widows, and orphans who had to fight to survive. Jessie walked along Cross Street, smiling despite her melancholy at the children playing stickball in the narrow alleys, their voices carrying in the air. Prosody, the bell above the door of Vito's grocery store, tinkled as Jessie stepped inside. "Jessie," Vito exclaimed heartily, his dark eyes twinkling. "How's my girl today?" "How many of your girls have been in today, Vito?" she asked, her mouth curving softly. Unperturbed, Vito grinned widely. "I don't know what you mean. I only have eyes for you, la mia donna bella." "And I'm sure you said that to all of your girls today, too," she replied in a teasing tone. Despite his advanced years, Vito still had a full head of hair, though it was now as white as snow and stuck out from his head in wispy tufts. His shop had been on the corner since before Jessie had been taken away to the orphanage. The shelves held an array of fresh foods, tinned and dried goods, to serve the community in which he had built his life. He sold bread by the slice to cater to his customers who rarely had enough money to buy a whole loaf of bread. "Mia caro," he leaned forward. "I keep for you, sai." He wrapped 2 slices of bread in waxy paper and added a tin on top. "Thank you, Vito. What's in the tin?" His massive shoulders lifted and dropped in quick succession. "Maybe fruit, maybe meat. I keep it for my special customer, yes? Maybe it, cheer you up." Vito wouldn't have been able to sell the tin to his more affluent customers, but he made sure to squeeze every penny out of his business and then tell customers like Jessie that he was doing them a favor by keeping them a surprise. Jessie knew that Mary would have flirted and bargained with the old shopkeeper until he was putty in her hands and would have given her the tin for free, but she nodded and dipped into her pockets to lift out the coins she'd earned that day. "Thank you, Vito." She offered him the coin, but his hand went to his forehead. "Wait, I have something. Where did I put it now?" He turned to the countertop at the back of his store, lifting items and dropping them back in abandon as he muttered to himself in Italian. Jessie frowned and was about to say that she'd call by tomorrow for it when Vito held an envelope aloft. As well as serving his customers, the grocery store also acted like a post office for the local mail. Having a safe place to send the letters meant that Jessie and Mary had been able to stay in touch. "Trovato," he declared cheerfully. "I found it. For you, though it isn't Mary's writing, no? Tell me, are you going to break my heart now, too, and head west? Please say no, mia dolce ragazza." Jessie frowned at the wording printed neatly, though when she turned it over and saw the return address, her blood turned to ice. Mary's address. No, I'm not." She flexed her mouth into a quick smile. "Thank you, Vito. Please forgive my rudeness, but she gathered up the bread slices and the tin. "I'm very tired. Good night." She rushed out through the door, clutching the items to her chest and ignoring his pleas to come back. She hurried along the sidewalk and sidled past the young men gathering in the doorway of her weary tenement building before she ducked inside and made her way up to the highest reaches of it. Nestled beneath the sagging eaves, the room that she'd once shared with Mary was a humble space. The room was bathed in permanent twilight, for its only illumination came from a small, begrimed window. The floorboards, gnarled and groaning under the weight of the years, creaked as she crossed to the blackened fireplace. She lit the taper to the remnants of the charred logs and patiently worked on the fire to get it to take. The paper-thin walls, once perhaps a vibrant hue, now bore the stains of dampness and neglect, their color washed to a sullen gray. A solitary, rickety bed claimed a corner of the room, its straw mattress sagging in the middle, the coarse linen sheets threadbare and worn. Beside it was a rough-hewn wooden table, unsteady on its legs, the surface scarred by use. Jessie used the low flame in the fireplace to light the stubby candle. Taking a deep breath to ease the panic that was clawing at her throat, she broke the seal along the envelope and began to read. "To Jessie Driscoll, you don't know me, but I've heard so much about you. I feel that I would be able to recognize you in a crowd. My name is Dorcas Spriggs. Your friend, Mary, married my son. I would have written to you sooner, but the past few months have been difficult for Larkin. I'm so very sorry to have to write these words, but Mary died last." Jessie dropped the paper as the knot of unease exploded. She covered her face, heart-rending sobs ripping from her throat. Laughing green eyes and red hair drifted just beyond her touch. She'd never get to hear her melodic voice or sit under the trees in a summer meadow as they'd talked about. Mary was gone, just as she'd known. Now what was she to do with a broken heart? Chapter 2. Copper Creek, Montana Territory. Mama. Larkin Spriggs stomped down the stairs and made his way into the living area of his home. The opulent space was warm and welcoming, with pieces of embroidery draped across the dark wooden furniture to make it more homely. Larkin loathed every single decoration adorning the place. It no longer felt like his home, with stark reminders of all that he'd lost surrounding him. He stormed back out of the door, opening and slamming doors as he made his way down the hallway to the small sitting room. He ground to a halt when he spotted his mother sitting near the hearth, sewing. She was looking at him with a steady gaze, and the child in him could feel her silent rebuke from across the room. Still, his tone was harsh as he demanded, "Have you been in her room again?" Dorcas Spriggs was a trim woman, with quiet eyes and a slow smile. Her pale gray hair was wound into a knot on top of her petite head. The deep purple of her smart dress was elegant and fitting of a wealthy woman living in New York, let alone in the wild hills of Montana. "Larkin." Dorcas lowered the embroidery she was working on. "If you are referring to Mary's room, then yes, I have. The room needed airing." "I told you to stay out of there," Larkin roared at her. Aware that his voice would carry, and Maddie and Molly might hear him, he lowered the volume of his voice slightly. "Stay out of there, and stay out of my business. This is my home." Dorcas's thin brow shot up. "Young man, this is your father's home. And while my heart beats in my chest, I think you'll find it's my home too. I know you are hurting, but acting like a bull in rutting season is not becoming a man of your status. Moderate your tone when you're speaking to me." The prim tone of his mother's voice only fueled his temper more. "It was her room. It's full of her things, and I want you to stay out of it," he ground out the last 3 words. "I mean it, Mama, or else you can take yourself back to the lodge where you were before she." Larkin's words failed him as his throat constricted. He still couldn't bring himself to say the words out loud. "You are treating her room as if it is a shrine," Dorcas said softly. "Mary wouldn't want you to be like this. The girl was full of life and laughter. She would want you to live your life, Larkin, to ensure that Maddie grows up to be a fine young man, just as you sometimes are, and that Molly understands the ways of a good man so that she falls in love with someone who will treat her well." Larkin's jaw ached from gritting his teeth to hold back the torrent of rage he wanted to spew at her. Deep down, he knew his mother was right. Mary would want him to keep his children happy, but the truth was, being around them also served as reminders of his old life. "Why were you in there anyway?" Dorcas asked him. "Have you suddenly taken up sewing?" He lifted anguish-filled eyes, the same forget-me-not blue as his mother's. He'd gone into the small box room at the back of the house because the room still carried Mary's lavender scent. If he stood in perfect silence and closed his eyes, he could dream that she was still standing next to him, sliding her arm through his as she rested her soft cheek on his shoulder. He would imagine himself turning his head and rubbing his lips against her temple, murmuring his love for her into the pretty shell of her ear. Admitting such fanciful thoughts to his mother was out of the question. His cheeks turned red as he stood there, glowering. "Where are the children?" he asked instead, though he could see by the look Dorcas was giving him that she hadn't been fooled by the subject change. "Molly has gone to play with Jed's little girl. Jane called earlier and asked if Molly wanted to keep their sweet Daisy company. You're lucky that you have good employees who care, Larkin." He folded his arms, using his superior height to glare down at her. "I care about my children, Mama, just as I care about Jed and Robbie and everyone else living on the ranch. The business needs to run well to feed sweet little Daisy and her 4 brothers, plus countless other children whose parents live and work here. I have their lives on my shoulders, as well as purchase ledgers and orders to fill, making sure that the trees are felled and planted. Don't you think that I would like to spend the afternoon with Maddie and Molly and—" "When was the last time that you spent any time with them, Larkin?" This time, Dorcas's voice had taken on a hard edge, showing him that he should remember she'd run the timber yard alongside some of his men after his father had died. "Ate a meal, even?" She shot to her feet smoothly, embroidery forgotten. She advanced on her son, unfazed by his height or the wrath that rolled off his big frame. "Your children need you, just as much as the men who work the lumber yard. Molly cries herself to sleep every night. Maddie barely speaks, and when he does, he's angry. They need their father." "I'm not talking about this again." Larkin turned on his heel and stalked away, pausing with his hand on the doorframe. "My children are fine. Stay out of her room, or else I'll move your clothes back into the lodge myself." The door was slammed back into the frame, and Dorcas's soft sigh filled the air. She crossed to the window when the front door was banged shut in a similar fashion and watched Larkin settle his hat on his dark head as he walked across the yard. Unlike John Spriggs, who'd been short and stocky, Larkin got his rangy height from her father. Nestled in a sheltered valley, the timber yard was a hive of activity against the backdrop of the untamed forest. The rhythmic clang of axes echoed off the surrounding hills, punctuated by the ripping sound of saws cutting through wood and the occasional shouted command. Rough-hewn logs, stripped of their bark, lay stacked in neat, disciplined rows. A nearby stream, harnessed by the ingenuity of John Spriggs and his comrades, powered a rudimentary sawmill, its wheels spinning with relentless determination. Men, hewn as roughly as the timber they worked, moved with purpose and muscle, their tools glinting under the clear sunlight of the Montana day. Dorcas knew that if she were to step outside onto the porch that spanned the front of the house, she would be wrapped up in the scent of fresh sawdust and pine resin. Larkin disappeared behind a stack of wood. John would be turning in his grave to hear doors being slammed in his house, Martha muttered. Dorcas looked back over her shoulder at the cook. That's true enough, though he'd be more worried about the wood being damaged than the cause of the temper, Dorcas said mildly. Martha let out a light chuckle as she wiped her hands on her white apron. And he wouldn't mind you saying as much. That boy still fixin' to start a fight in an empty house? Dorcas didn't have to look at the woman who'd helped raise Larkin to know that she was worried about him too. Yes, I went into Mary's room. Molly needed a little pick-me-up. Mary bought that new thread before she... Martha patted her on the back when Dorcas's voice trailed off. I know, I missed the little Irish rascal too. Dorcas's lips moved. No one had been more horrified that her son had chosen a bride out of a newspaper than she was. There had been plenty of women in the valley and beyond who would have been a good enough wife for her son, but none of them would have suited him as much as Mary Patrick did. When Mary had first arrived, Dorcas had kept her distance, thankful for the cabin at the edge of the property, but Mary had made a point of calling by every day to check on her. The girl might have had a prickly exterior, but she was fierce and loyal, and matched her husband in the work that she'd done. She also had a heart of gold. It's been 6 months now, Martha. The children need him, but I think he needs them more. It's like he can't see what's in front of him. He'll come back to us, Martha said. But when? He's thrown himself into his work. This is different from how he was after John died. Even after he came back from the war, Dorcas hated to think back on those dark times, when only one of her 3 sons had returned home. When it's time, Martha assured her. Dorcas's eyes moved across the familiar site of the enclosure, over the rooftops of the log cabins and the barns, to where the wild pines stretched their emerald arms toward the endless blue sky. Snow-capped mountain tips peeked between the clouds that gathered around the peaks. I haven't dared tell him that I wrote to Mary's friend. He'll be even more furious that I've interfered once more. Martha clicked her tongue. He'll have to get used to the fact that he wasn't the only one to love the girl. You did the right thing by letting her friend know. Mary would have wanted it. I'm sure of it. Dorcas nodded, just as certain too. Mary had talked about Jessie Driscoll every day, and Dorcas knew that Mary had hoped for her friend to write to one of the lumberjacks, fall in love and move here to live close by her once more. I just wish that she'd write back to me, just so I'd know that the letter got there. She must be wondering why she'd not heard from Mary. I can't bear the thought of the poor girl not knowing. The address for the grocery shop was the only one I could find among her things. If Larkin knew that I was in there snooping again for more clues, I'm sure he'd be sure to cast me out of both this home and the Pine Lodge. Then he'd have a real fight on his hands, Dorcas. Starting with me, Martha muttered. Dorcas chortled. I have no problem in believing that you would. I wish I could take away even a little of his grief. Molly and Maddie are just adrift without him. I heard Maddie crying earlier. When I went out onto the porch, he was wiping at his face and telling me the noise was from a wild dog, even though his little cheeks were wet and smeared with dirt. It hurts my heart. The way Mary tried to hold on for them. Dorcas's voice grew husky, and she wrapped her arms around herself. I never thought I'd miss her the way I do, especially when we didn't ever see eye to eye when she first got here. Ooh, you were spittin' mad, Martha replied, her eyes sparkling with mirth. And there she was, with that liltin' brogue of hers ignoring your cussin'. I didn't cuss, Dorcas stated indignantly and leaned back to glare at her friend, even as her mouth twitched at the edges. Course not, Martha retorted. Poor girl, with you turning the air blue about people interfering, and yet she still insisted on fetching you cakes and bread to make sure you were eating. Dorcas's memories warmed her. Martha was right. She'd been furious that this stranger had extended her kindness even as Dorcas had been sulking about not getting her own way with Larkin. I wonder what she'd say to him now. Martha tipped her head to Dorcas's shoulder. She'd say to him, remember to forget the things that make you sad. I believe you're right. Larkin will find his way back. He loved the woman with his whole heart. He just has to find a way to live without her now. We both know the pain of having to live anew without the ones we love. We'll pray on it together, ask the Lord to shine his love down on him. Dorcas's eyes shimmered, and she laid her hand on top of the cook's that was along her midriff. I would like that. Thank you, Martha. Chapter 3. I know you're grieving, Gwen said, but that is the worst idea I think you've ever had. You can't. Annie's tone was final. Jessie sent a calming smile around the workbench, determined to convince them of the seriousness of her plans. It was a sign from Mary. It was a dream, Gwen interjected pointedly. It wasn't a sign from above, nor was it a hint that you should leave your life here behind for the unknown. I think Gwen is right, Louise chimed in. Trains get robbed, and people are murdered out west. People get murdered here in New York, too, Jessie countered, even as Louise's words struck a sliver of fear into her heart. For the first time since I received Mrs. Spriggs' letter, it feels like I'm finally on the right path again. I know deep down that this is what Mary would have wanted. Her dream had been a vivid one, and she'd woken tangled up in the blanket, her skin damp. She'd been able to see her friend's face clearly in the flashes of lightning. She'd heard the rain that trickled on the inside of the orphanage walls. Echoes of past promises had drifted through her mind, and when she opened her eyes, she knew that going west was the right thing to do. I made a promise to her that if something ever happened to her, her children would not go without a mother. She made the same promise to me. Jessie, Gwen leaned forward, her expression solemn. No one knows the pain of loss or what it's like growing up without a mother more than you do, but you'd made that promise as a little girl without being aware of just what you'd have been agreeing to. It was just two children who were both frightened in a storm. No, Jessie said firmly, eyes on the fabric that she was feeding through her machine. No, Gwen, it was Mary. I know it. I felt her there with me. She was just reminding me of something that had been tucked away in my mind behind all that sadness. I don't expect you to understand, but she looked up at them then, her blue eyes resting on them one at a time so they would understand her words' gravity. I'm going. How are you going to get there? Annie asked, her head returning to work as Mr. Waddington appeared. Jessie had to wait a while before she could reply once she was certain that the foreman was out of sight. Train, that's how Mary went, though her fare was paid for by the man she married. I just need the money for a ticket to get there. I thought maybe I'd ask if there was any more work going on here. Work a few extra hours. Maybe pick up some extra sewing work or a job down at the docks. 3 pairs of eyes lifted, horror written all over their faces as they stared at her. In one of the taverns down there, she clarified in a hushed whisper, her cheeks turning bright pink at the very idea of having a man pay her for that kind of work. Mary said that her ticket was over $100, but third class is $65. $65, Gwen hissed at her. Where are you going to get that kind of money? Jessie felt a little of her positivity drain away. It was an impossible figure to earn, especially since she'd struggled to meet rent after Mary had left. She'd managed to scrape a few coins in savings, but not that amount. I'll earn it, Jessie shrugged like she was unconcerned. It might take me a few weeks, but I'll do it. Months, more like, Louise said unhelpfully. You hush up, Annie told her neighbor. She'll do it. Jessie's mouth quirked a little at Annie, and she wished for some of her verve from earlier back, but the doubts had begun to seep into her mind. Maybe her friends were right. It was a nice thought, but right now an impossible dream. Her eyes grew hot, and she blinked to clear her tears. It had been like that ever since the letter had arrived. She'd think that she had no more tears left to shed, and then another memory would slam into her, and she'd be crying again. She used her apron to dab at her face, and Gwen patted her thigh. She knew that they felt her loss, though not as keenly. The bright light that was Mary Spriggs now, had been extinguished. Somehow, the world felt like a much darker place without her in it. Jessie finished the workday in silence, lost in thoughts. Gwen made her promise that she would try and get some sleep, though she knew that things wouldn't feel better in the morning, as Gwen predicted. $65 felt like such an insurmountable amount to earn. Her feet took her back towards 5 points of their own volition. Her mind caught up in tumultuous feelings. I must at least try, she thought, and decided that she'd go to Mr. Waddington in the morning. She would try throwing herself on his mercy, though she didn't hold out much hope that he would grant her extra hours. She could find piecework, doing little bits of mending and sewing. Though Louise was right, working that way would take an age to save up all that money. She trudged home past Vito's grocery store, intent on saving what money she would have spent on food when he called her back. She turned to see him standing on the sidewalk outside his place. "You don't want your supper?" He flapped a small paper parcel at her. "I'm not hungry this evening, Vito," she replied, waving him off. "Aspetta un minuto," he shouted. "Wait a minute, mio caro. I have something. It arrived yesterday, but you've not been in to see me. I wondered if this might make you happy?" Frowning, Jessie closed the gap between them and took the parcel that he held. He tucked the envelope into the folds of the waxy paper. Jessie recognized Mrs. Spriggs's handwriting. "Grazie, Vito," she murmured. She hadn't expected a reply from the other lady, and she wasn't sure that she had the energy left to read the other woman's commiserations after such a turbulent day. "Jessie, I wish there was something I could do to make you happy again," Vito said kindly to her. "Please, if there's anything you need." "You've already done enough, Vito, by giving me the paper to reply to Mary's mother-in-law and then putting the stamp on it for me." Vito laid a pudgy hand over his heart. "I like to help my friends. Mary was my love. She broke my heart when she left me, and again now that she has passed." She was moved by his sentiment and reminded once more how many lives Mary touched. She went up on her tiptoes and pecked a light kiss on his cheek. "Thank you, Vito. How much do I owe you?" He folded her hands, parcel as well, within his own. "No charge, mia bella. If you need some more paper, you come and see old Vito." A watery smile wobbled across her mouth, and she nodded. "Thank you. You are a kind man. Have a good evening." She climbed the stairs to the room under the eaves, feeling as if she'd aged many years since that morning when she'd trotted down them, buoyed by plans that she was going to make good on her promise and help Mary's children. Now that idea felt as if it was getting further away by the hour. She set the wrapped bread and letter on the thin mattress and coaxed a small flame out of the fireplace. She sat on the floor, her knees tucked up under her chin, and watched the flame tentatively dance around the coal pieces. Knowing that she couldn't fulfill the promise that she'd made to Mary felt like a fresh betrayal of their friendship. Even if she could find extra work at the factory, it would still take many weeks to earn enough for the train fare west. Her eyes drifted around the gloomy room. It was bereft of any luxuries that she could sell. A single shelf hacked directly into the wall held a collection of meager belongings, a cracked ceramic bowl, a spoon worn thin with use, and a single dog-eared book. Her eyes fell onto Vito's parcel. She should eat, seeing as he had taken the time to gift her the food. With a long sigh, she got to her feet and picked up the parcel before she resumed her position in front of the fire. Sitting cross-legged, she set the envelope aside and unwrapped the slices. As she chewed, her eyes kept moving back to the letter. The last time she'd received such a thing, she'd not been ready for the hefty blow it had delivered to her. Telling herself that she was being silly, and there could be no news that Mrs. Spriggs could say that would be any worse, she opened the envelope and began to read. "Dear Jessie, I was so pleased to receive your letter. I wasn't sure if the address that I found in Mary's belongings was still current and had been quite worried. Please don't worry about the delay. I'm so sorry to have been the one to let you know that sad news. Thank you for asking after the children. They are understandably grief-stricken. As you know, Mary was such a vibrant and kind soul, and we are all feeling the loss. Maddie seems a little lost. He's silent or he's angry. There isn't an in-between. Molly just wants to pretend that all is well in her life, a habit I'm afraid she's picked up from her father. Anytime Mary's name is mentioned, Molly refuses to talk and will quickly change the subject. I see the many faces of grief all around this house. I worry that the children will forget who their mother was and how much she loved them. I try and tell this to the children, but I'm met with resistance on all fronts. It saddens me to know that after I've gone, they will only have their father, who is so broken by the loss of his beloved that I fear he is truly adrift. I'm not even sure why I'm telling you this. We are strangers, connected by a common love for Mary only. Martha, my dear friend who is also a cook here for the family, and the lumberjacks said that it is because I'm grieving too. And this made me think about you. Mary spoke of you often, and I know that she held a great love for you. I know that your parents passed when you were young, and that both you and Mary ended up at the orphanage together. Mary told me that if it weren't for you, she may have taken a very different path in her life, one that would have brought shame to her hard-working parents. It was your faith and your belief that found her work. She credits your continuous support in making her the strong woman that she became. And now, unless things have changed since you last wrote to Mary, you too are all alone. At least I have my family here, even if they are all scattered to the winds at present. I know that Mary loved you like a sister. Mary was like the daughter I never had, and so I wish to extend the hand of friendship across the territories. Of course, you might think that this letter is the ramblings of a crazy woman who has succumbed to age. You may be right, but writing to you helps me feel a little bit closer to her. It might be the same for you. If there is anything that you need, anything at all, then please let me know. I have enclosed $5. I mean, no insult by this, but your letter mentioned that you had no paper or envelopes and that you'd had to use ink from a friend. The money might ease your worries and encourage you to keep an old woman company through letters. Yours truly, Mrs. Dorcas Spriggs, Whispering Pines, Copper Creek, Montana Territory. Jessie read the letter twice more. She remembered Mary complaining about how resistant Mrs. Spriggs had been toward a mail-order wife for her only son, though once she had thawed, Mary had grown very fond of her mother-in-law. The warmth of reciprocation shone through her words. The postal order meant that she would be able to buy paper and envelopes, or she could put it toward her train fare. Her heart jolted as the idea took hold. Could she write to Dorcas Spriggs and tell her about the dream that she'd had, and about how she felt that the dream has been a message from the Lord about how she could help Mary? She chewed on her lower lip as doubts crowded into her mind. Mrs. Spriggs might think that she too had taken leave of her senses, much as Gwen and Annie did, but they shared the same sentiment. Jessie wanted Mary to live on in Maddie and Molly's memory. Decision made, Jessie crammed the last of the bread into her mouth and hurried out of the door, back to Vito's. She had a letter to write. Chapter 4. The shrill whistle pierced through the hubbub of the train station, and Jessie's heart began to race. Passengers raced along the platform, a sea of life ebbing and flowing around the great iron beast. The last time she'd been here, it had been to see Mary off on her adventure. This time, it wasn't so much an adventure as an obligation, and she wondered, not for the first time, if she was making a big mistake. The job at the factory wasn't pleasant, but it made her money. She had a life here in New York, with friends and colleagues who knew her. She was leaving this all behind for the unknown, on the promise of a woman she'd never met, but who had welcomed the chance to have an ally in the Whispering Pines home. Gwen's words of warning drifted through her mind as she listened to the carriage doors slam shut along the platform. What will you do if it all goes wrong? How will you get back home? She'd written to Mrs. Spriggs and had explained about their childhood promise and about how she was going to save up the money for her train fare because she wanted to help Molly and Maddie more than ever after reading about how they were both struggling. Dorcas had replied that she would be happy to loan her the money for the train fare if she would come and work for the family and help her take care of the children. The letters had been exchanged in only a matter of a few weeks, and now she had finished her factory job and was bound for Montana to honor her promise. She knew that Gwen and Annie were only looking out for her, but this felt like kismet, almost as if she'd been pushed onto this path by her guardian angel. She couldn't think about being hundreds of miles from all that she knew. She just had to take this leap of faith and hope that everything was going to work out. With a chuff and a clunk, the carriage jerked, kicking at her pulse once more. She clutched her tatty carpet bag in her lap and looked through the window with wide eyes. The hustle and bustle of the cityscape of New York gradually dissolved into a blur of colors, replaced by the verdant expanses of the countryside. Jessie pressed her face against the cool glass of the train window, watching the ever-changing panorama with fascination. Rolling hills and charming little towns tucked into green valleys, mills and churches with their steeples spiking out of the tree lines, vast fields of golden wheat dancing in the wind, and the warmth of the sun on her face as the train rumbled across the lands. Jessie was enchanted by the scenes unfolding before her, a world so different from the urban life she had known. The sight of the Great Lakes, their waters shimmering like jewels beneath the sun, left her breathless. The train made many stops as it traversed from east to west, and there was an array of passengers that she met that added to the richness of her journey. On one stop, curiosity made her take a peep into the luxury of the first-class car, with its vibrant purple velvet benches and servants who poured tea with their white gloves on, before she returned to her unadorned car with its hard wooden benches and open windows. She huddled deeper into her thin coat and ate salted meat out of a paper bag that had turned dark with the grease. Dorcas might have sent her the fee for a first-class train ticket, but she intended on returning the unused fare. She'd only wanted the train fare to Montana, and third class was generous enough for Jessie Driscoll. At night, Jessie would often lie awake, tucked into the corner of the bench, listening to the rhythmic clickety-clack of the wheels on the tracks and the hissing of the steam engine. The rocking of the train lulled her to sleep, and she dreamed of Mary, of Mrs. Spriggs, of a life unknown. The train climbed higher into the Rockies, disappearing into the clouds that clung to the snow-capped peaks before its descent into Montana. The landscape grew wilder and more rugged, with dense forests and untamed rivers. The patchwork quilt of farmland, fields of corn and wheat extending to the horizon, punctuated by the occasional farmhouse or barn. Herds of buffalo grazed on the plains, and eagles soared in the clear blue sky. Copper Creek! All passengers for Copper Creek. She heard the conductor announce as the train ground to a halt. Leaving the confined compartment, she stepped out onto the wooden platform and caught her first breath of crisp mountain air that was tinged with the scent of pine from the surrounding forests. The town of Copper Creek boasted both a train station and a home station for the stagecoaches that took passengers on their onward journeys, connecting the outlying towns and communities. The train station was a simple structure made of sturdy timber, its roof providing a much-needed refuge from the ever-changing mountain weather. Alongside it, the single-track railway snaked its way through the valley, away from the town, nestled in the wilderness. She clutched her carpet bag to her chest, following the flow of people towards the dirt roads that she could see beyond the covering of the station. As she reached the side of the road, she was greeted with another new sight. A busy street filled with the townsfolk loading up wagons, or coaches disgorging more folks still. She walked out onto the street, unsure of what to do next. She racked her frozen mind, trying to recall Mrs. Spriggs's descriptions of where the lumber yard was. Perhaps she should have written to Dorcas and confirmed that someone would meet her train, though she'd simply wanted to get here and hadn't thought that far ahead. She knew that Mary would be teasing her for not planning as meticulously as she normally did. The town spread out before her in an array of simple, practical structures, huddled together as they lined the single street that cut through the heart of the town. The wooden storefronts announced the name of the shops and what shoppers could find within, all cast in the radiant glow of the setting sun. A saloon that had sounds of laughter rolling out of its doors, a general store, the clang of the blacksmith's forge, and quaint little houses behind the main street, their gardens brimming with flowers and vegetables, with their chimneys puffing tendrils of smoke into the sky. To the west, the towering Rockies rose like silent guardians, their peaks kissed by the last of the day's light. She was used to the constant barrage of sounds in New York, from street hawkers to the clatter of wheels on the cobblestoned roads. Here, the sounds weren't as frenzied. She could hear the creak of the wagon wheels on the dirt roads and the murmurs of the unhurried townsfolk, their sun-weathered faces smiling as they greeted each other. A slow, deliberate pace that spoke of a life lived in harmony with the nature that surrounded them. She remembered that she had a little bit of money in her pocket left over from Dorcas. She backtracked toward the train station, thinking that she might be able to find someone with a wagon who could give her directions and, for a coin, take her to Whispering Pines. "Are you lost, pretty lady?" Jessie wanted to ignore the man who was lounging against the saloon doors, but beggars couldn't be choosers. She stopped, her heart racing when she felt several of the men gathered along the bench that spanned the length of Leo's saloon looking at her. "Actually, yes." The man grinned at her and reminded her of a slavering dog that had found a bone. She almost took a step back, but knew from experience that that wouldn't help. "Prosody rake. Come a little closer then," he beckoned her. "Tell old Robbie here all about it." Jessie didn't move. "Could you tell me how to get to Whispering Pines?" Robbie's grin widened. "I could. Why don't you let me buy you a drink and we'll get to know each other a bit better?" "No, thank you." The grin faded when the sniggers rumbled along the benches. "Well now, that's not being polite. Where I come from, if a man offers to buy you a drink, a woman ought to show a bit of gratitude." "I don't want a drink," Jessie said evenly. "I want some directions, or better yet, a wagon ride to the place. I can pay." "I told you the price. A drink in your company." The grin was back, more crocodilian than before. Jessie shook her head. Never mind. She turned on a booted heel and swallowed the yelp when Robbie grabbed her by the arm and hauled her against him. "Take your filthy hands off me." She hissed and landed a balled fist on his chin. He stumbled back in surprise, a hand on his face. Jessie had but a moment to see the shock roll into drunken anger to realize that she'd made an error in judgment. He advanced on her, though he didn't get very far, before a gravelly voice cut through the guffawing and hee-hawing laughter. "That's enough, Robbie." "Mind your business, Griff," Robbie sneered over his shoulder. Jessie didn't wait to see who her savior was. She used the momentary distraction to her advantage and hurried across the street, back toward the station, her heart hammering. She'd been a fool. She might know how to handle herself in 5 points, but there she had allies. She knew safe places she could shelter and alleys in which she could hide. This town was unknown, and already she'd played with fire by annoying a drunken man. The train station was quieter since the train had departed. There was only one wagon at the roadside, a bored-looking horse flicking his tail as a man hefted crates into the back. He paused, though, and when his eyes moved to look behind her, Jessie whirled again, fists raised. Her apprehension dropped a little when she saw it wasn't Robbie ambling along the sidewalk toward her. "What's your business at Whispering Pines?" he called out to her. She recognized the raspy voice of the man who'd interrupted Robbie's advances. She wasn't sure that she had any business at all being there, or how to vocalize it. Not for the first time, she wondered if she should have warned Dorcas that she was on her way. The man's dark eyes watched her carefully. His face was the same brown as the saddle on the back of the horse he led. "I have business with Mrs. Spriggs." His only reaction was a little dip in his wiry brow. "Dorcas?" "That's right." He continued to watch her. "Where you from?" Jessie hugged her carpet bag closer to her chest, debating the relevance of his questions. "New York. I thought for sure you'd be one of those brides. You know, here to find a lumberjack husband," he said. Jessie snorted. "Goodness, no, I'm not looking for a husband. Not today. Not ever." He continued to watch her steadily, and Jessie felt that she was being thoroughly assessed. "I can take you to Whispering Pines." She narrowed an eye at him. "I'm not having a drink with you." It was his turn to snort with laughter. "Didn't ask, did I?" Jessie fisted a hand on her hip. "How much do you want, then?" "The name is Griff," he said instead, lips twitching. "I work up at Whispering Pines. If I were to charge a friend of Dorcas's for something as simple as a ride back to the yard, I'm sure she'd have my guts for garters." "Oh," Jessie's hand lowered to her side. "Well, all right then." She walked a few feet to where Griff stood. "Thank you." He inclined his head. What's your name? Jessie Driscoll, she offered him a hand. Nice to meet you. Likewise, he shook her hand and then swung up into the saddle. Once seated, he reached down for her. Do you need a hand up or? Oh, he muttered as she clambered up into the saddle without preamble and settled in front of him. Okay then. Griff turned the horse around and they rode in silence throughout the town. Is it far? About 3 miles as the crow flies, he said. The road makes it a little longer. How long before we get there? She asked, eyes dancing around the scenery that they rode through. Pines and aspens, their branches swayed in the gentle breeze, their green contrasting starkly against the reds and browns of the Montana soil. Wildflowers added splashes of color to the scene, with a nearby mountain stream whispering as it tumbled over rocks below the road. Long enough for you to tell me how you know Dorcas Spriggs? Griff's voice was laced with amusement. Jessie sighed. I was Mary Spriggs' best friend. Chapter 5. The door slammed back into the frame. Larkin shot to his feet so fast that his chair tipped over as his temper boiled. Matthew, you get back here right this minute, he bellowed. He wrenched open the kitchen door just as the front door slammed, and he heard the hurried footsteps of his son scurrying away. Matthew! Let him go, Larkin, Dorcas said mildly. Larkin rounded on his mother. I will not. I will find him and tan his backside for him so he can't sit down for a week. You started it, Larkin, Dorcas pointed out. Larkin's mouth dropped open. He stared at his mother, who sat at one end of the wide kitchen table. He wasn't sure how she managed it, but the regal look she was bestowing upon him made him feel small, even though he towered over her when she was standing, let alone sitting down. I did not. You did, Dorcas said. He doesn't like cabbage. He never has. Larkin stalked back to his seat and righted it. Well, he will learn to like it, and he won't slam the door in a house that isn't his. Dorcas sipped delicately at her cup. When she set it back down, she said, Well, the door slamming is probably something that he's picked up from you. Mama, you're overstepping here. I love you, but... But nothing, Dorcas interrupted. Maddie has never liked cabbage, so why on earth you'd insist that Martha put it on his plate, I don't know. It's good, honest food, grown on our lands. The boy has to know that there are some things in life that he has to get on with, including eating his supper. You being soft on him won't help him in the long run. Mary didn't like boiled cabbage either, Dorcas replied primly. I've finished. Molly dropped her fork with a clatter and quickly slipped down from the table. I have to go finish my reading, Pa. Larkin watched his firstborn scamper out of the room. Frustration ate a hole in his gut, and he wished that he had the answers to ease their pain. It seemed like nothing he said or did for them was right these days. He crossed to the window, watching Maddie as he kicked at the stones in the dusty yard. The shadows were long as the sun sank behind the trees, but he could tell by the slump of his thin shoulders that Maddie was crying. You've got to stop interfering in how I raise these kids, Mama, he said quietly. They need to be toughened up a heck of a lot if they're to survive. By toughening up, do you mean acting like a bear with a sore head and berating others? Larkin sent an arch look over his shoulder at his mother. What's that supposed to mean? Dorcas returned the glare. Larkin, Maddie's outbursts are because he's seen you do the same. He thinks that this is how he's supposed to be acting. That's not true. He's just being a brat. Larkin looked back out of the window. He'll learn how to be a man. He's only 4 years old. He has a long way to go before he becomes a man. He's old enough to know that he doesn't need to be pitching a temper tantrum because there's a vegetable on his plate that he doesn't like, Larkin retorted. The table behind him creaked, and he heard the chair scrape against the floor as his mother stood. You're being pig-headed, Larkin, Dorcas said. I'm trying to keep this place running, Mama. What I don't need is another lesson from you on where I'm going wrong. Well, you're going to get one, regardless. Children learn how to behave from the adults that they live with. Right now, Maddie's temper and Molly's refusal to acknowledge any time that her mother's name is mentioned is because they've seen the same behaviors in you. Larkin rolled his eyes and turned away from a forlorn Maddie to glower at his mother. You think you have all the answers, don't you? that we should coddle the children and shield them from everything that can hurt them. I'm telling you that that's wrong. Life is tough, Mama. It's cruel, and it's hard. They need to know that terrible things are going to happen to them. Their mother died. Dorcas threw her hands in the air, her voice climbing to match the volume of his. Don't you think that that's cruel enough without their father stomping around here with his tail high all the livelong day? I can't keep having this same argument with you, Mama. Molly and Maddie have adjusted perfectly well. When are you going to get that? The fact that you think they're doing okay shows just how out of touch you are with them. They're lost, Larkin, hurt and grieving, just the same as you are. And all you do is try and bully them into submission or skip around the subject by going back out to work. You don't know what you're talking about, Larkin shouted, his temper getting the better of him. He could tell by the stunned expression that he'd gone a step too far again. I don't know what I'm talking about. She laid a hand on her chest as her eyes burned with anger. Well, pardon me, Larkin Spriggs, but did I not have a hand in raising you and your brothers? Was I not the one who stood alongside your father as he built this house? And what about after he died? Who looked after this house and kept the accounts straight? Me. I did. I know exactly what you're going through because I've been there myself. You don't have the monopoly on grief in my book. I miss Mary too. Just hearing her name was like a knife cut to the skin. I don't want to talk about this. I'm fed up with you bringing it up all the time and checking how I'm raising them. Larkin stomped for the same door his son had slammed his way through, but his mother wasn't finished with him just yet. And that's where Molly gets it from, running away as soon as someone mentions Mary's name. If you're not careful, those children will forget all about their mother, and that will be a crime. I'm glad I wrote to her friend now. Larkin froze with his hand on the door. When he looked back at his mother, his eyes were reduced to slits as dread rolled through him. His mother held his gaze steadily, though he could see the guilt shining in her eyes. What did you do now, Mama? His voice was low and lethal. Dorcas's deep sigh inflated her cheeks on its way out. Well, I'd hoped to tell you when you weren't in such a vile mood, but I guess this is as good a time as any to tell you. Larkin let go of the door handle and took a step back into the room. Tell me what? The way her eyes danced around spoke volumes about just how much he wasn't going to like what she was about to say. Mama, he growled. What have you done this time? I wrote to Mary's friend Jessie, the one she always talked about back in New York. Dorcas met his furious gaze briefly, then moved around the simple kitchen once more. I was going to tell you, she added quickly when he advanced again, but there never seemed the right time to talk to you about it. I found her address in Mary's things. I told you to stay out of her things, Larkin roared. You had no right. I did, Dorcas countered, and you will lower your voice when speaking to me, young man. He slammed his fist down on the tabletop. You have no place to root around this home, nor try and lecture me on propriety. Mary would have wanted Jessie to know. She loved that girl like a sister, and Jessie was frantic with worry about why she'd not heard from Mary in months. She said that she knew that something was wrong. Fury pulsed through him. What else aren't you telling me? Dorcas rolled her lips inwards, and she traced a fingertip along the wood grain. Her reluctance nudged at his temper, and he had to curl his hands into fists to try and keep a hold of it. Mama, what else? Jessie is a lovely girl. She agrees with me that she thinks that the children need to remember their mother. She thinks that talking about Mary will help them. Oh, does she now? Then it's a good job that she's not here to raise them, and that it's also not her business either. What's that look for? This time, her guilty look didn't slither away. I sent her money for her travel to come here. I'm hoping that she'll accept and come west to help us all. Larkin's heart almost stopped as he gaped at his mother. He shook his head, although words failed him. Now, before you get all bent out of shape, I'll tell you why this is a good idea. Jessie knew Mary well. She lost her mother when she was young, so she knows all about growing up without one. I'm not getting any younger either, so I won't be here as they get older. She is a hard worker, and she's struggling, just like Mary was when she got here. She can help you with the children, maybe clean the house. And she... That's it, Larkin exploded. Out, Mama. You get out of this house right now. You've gone too far this time. You can't throw me out of my own home. Watch me. Larkin marched to the back door and threw it open, pointing at the yard. Get out, right now. Dorcas folded her arms. I will not leave, Larkin Spriggs. I don't want to, but I will carry you out. Please, Mama, go, before I say or do something that we'll both regret. Dorcas cocked a brow at him, daring him to carry out his threat. Instead, he speared his hands through his hair and held his head. I cannot believe that you've done that. I don't want some stranger here in my home. Jessie isn't a stranger, Dorcas began. You don't know her, Mama. She could be anything or anyone. Even, Larkin caught himself before her name tripped out of his mouth. It's been almost 6 years since this woman would have spoken to. Mary, Dorcas said quietly into the thrumming silence. Her name is Mary. I know her name, he thundered. I remember everything about her, so I don't need some pokey soiled dove from the east coming here, putting crazy notions into Maddie and Molly about their mama. For all you know, this Jessie woman is as crooked as a dog's hind leg and can't lie straight in bed. I don't want some half-wit woman living in my house, thinking that she can live off my coin and tuck her feet under my table. And don't think I don't know what you're up to. Larkin pointed at Dorcas. You think if you trot some woman in here, I'm going to forget all about Mary and marry some other bit of skirt who's probably as ugly as homemade sin and dull as dishwater. The pointed throat clearing brought the two of them round. Griff stood in the doorway, threading the brim of his hat through his gnarled fingers. But it was the blonde-haired woman glaring at him that dried the rest of his words up in his mouth. The woman folded her arms. Then I guess it's a good job I'm not here looking for a husband, isn't it? Chapter 6. Whispering pines peeked between the trees as Jessie and Griff approached along the long driveway that weaved through the woodland. Jessie got her first real look at the place that Mary had so painstakingly described in her letters. The emotion that slammed into her took her breath away when she realized that she'd done what they'd always talked about, to visit Mary's new home. Only Mary wasn't here to be able to greet her. She was never going to see Mary ever again. She had to cover her mouth to hold in the sob. Are you in pain? Griff's voice rumbled behind her. It was pain. It was almost physical, but there was nothing she could do to ease the ache of loneliness that washed over her. She could only shake her head and blink against the tears that pooled in her eyes. The sun had slid behind the mountains, the sky a resplendent display of crimson and gold that darkened to a purple at its zenith. The 2-story house was a harmonious timber and gray stone mix, sitting in the heart of the lumber yard. Outhouses, a barn, and a longer single-story structure were visible on the fields that rolled away to the left, and somewhere she could hear the thunder of a river. A small figure darted from the corner of her eye, and she watched the dark-haired boy, no more than 3 or 4, skirt around the house with the swift-footed grace of youth as they approached. He was a sprite of the yard, vanishing into the lengthening shadows as quickly as he had appeared. The faint scent of pine and sawdust tickled her nose as Griff reined to a stop in the middle of the yard. She heard the soft murmur of conversation, a symphonic blend of laughter, friendly banter, and the clink of cutlery against plates coming from the longer structure. She watched as several weathered faces appeared in the windows to look at the guests, and she guessed that it must be a bunkhouse for the workmen. Griff returned the greeting of those who called out to him as he dismounted. Jessie was aware of the interest that her arrival held, though she averted her eyes. Griff held a hand up for her, though she quickly swung her leg over the front of the saddle and landed nimbly in front of him. Thanks, I can manage, she murmured as her gaze drifted to the main house. The structure stood in stark contrast to the untamed wilderness that surrounded it. The gabled roof, covered in weathered wooden shingles, crowned the structure. Wisps of smoke curled out of the stone chimney and up into the dusky sky, carrying with them the promise of warmth and a hot meal. The scent of wood smoke was a comfort to her and reminded her of home. Windows, large and inviting on the first floor, punctuated the house's facade, their glass panes reflecting the evening sky. Above, smaller windows glowed behind drapes that billowed in the gentle wind. "This way," Griff indicated, and allowed her to walk in front of him. They approached a sturdy oak door framed by a modest-covered porch jutting out from the entrance. A pair of dusty boots sat to one side of the door. Jessie stepped back so that Griff could open the door. It was when the door swung back that she heard the raised voices. She looked at the older man and caught his slight frown, which confirmed he'd heard it too. She was about to hang back to be polite when she heard her name. Her heartache fizzled to puzzlement, and she trailed behind Griff as he made his way along the hallway toward the raised voices, so that by the time they'd reached the kitchen, her perplexity had moved over into annoyance. The dark-haired man stood next to the open back door where she could see out into a well-tended vegetable garden beyond the yard, leading to more forest. With the dying embers of the sun at his back, his face was in shadows. His insults died on his lips, and she felt the weight of his stare when it settled on her. Fury radiated off him. He towered over the slight woman he was shouting at, though the woman looked just as annoyed as he did. "Sorry," Griff offered into the heavy silence. Jessie was staring at the furious brute who was glaring right back at her. His raven-black hair was ruffled as if he'd dragged his hands through it. Cold, flinty eyes raked over her form, which only annoyed her further. Griff spoke to Dorcas, his gravelly voice low. "The front door was open. I found this young woman in the town. She said that you were expecting her, Dorcas." The mention of the woman's name broke the stalemate. Jessie dropped her arms and held out a hand. "Nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Spriggs. I'm Jessie Driscoll." Dorcas's blue eyes, identical to the man who now fisted his hands on his hips as he watched them, softened and her mouth curved. "Goodness, Jessie, it's so wonderful to meet you in person. I didn't get your letter, else I would have ensured that there was someone to meet your train." Jessie was increasingly aware of the thunderous man looming, though she kept her tone light. "I didn't write one, I'm afraid, Mrs. Spriggs." Dorcas pulled out a chair and patted the high back. "Come now, Jessie. We're friends. Please call me Dorcas. You must be tired after your journey." "I'm not too bad, though would you have a bowl of water?" She held up her hand to show her the split skin across her knuckles. Dorcas's brows shot up. "What on earth have you done to yourself?" Griff's wry chuckle sounded like rocks shaking in a barrel. She gave Robbie Peters a little lesson in decorum. Jessie could tell as he moved about the kitchen that he was used to it. He scooped water from a barrel under the window and plucked a rag out of a drawer. What was Robbie doing? This was the first time that the angry man had said a word. His voice was deep and wary. Griff set the bowl down and gave the cloth to Jessie. "Being downright rude. He deserved what he got, though I don't suppose he'll be retelling the tale the way it happened anytime soon. I'd best get myself across to the bunkhouse and make sure Martha has kept some supper for me." "Thank you, Mr. Griff," Jessie said, offering him a smile. "Just Griff is fine and dandy. Thank you, miss," he muttered as he left through the open back door. "Shall I take a look at your hand for you?" Dorcas said as the stony silence resumed. Jessie examined the injury. "It's just a scrape. I've had worse, but thank you." The tinkling water was the only sound in the kitchen as Jessie bathed her hand. "Jessie," Dorcas said, "about what you heard Larkin say." Jessie's eyes shot up. Larkin Spriggs, Mary's husband. This was the one whom Mary had written such poetic words about. A muscle bounced in his jaw and his stare was unfriendly. "I don't need you to defend me, Mama. She was in my home uninvited." Jessie's lips parted. No, she couldn't correlate this brute with the kind and wonderful man whom Mary had fallen for. "I'd be happy to show you the letter that did extend an invite." Jessie overrode the warning that Dorcas was giving her son. "Assuming you can read, Mr. Spriggs." His face turned a dark shade of red. "You've got some nerve, lady. You've no idea who I am. We've only just met, and I already know that you're a rude and insufferable man. You just sling insults at your poor mama who just wants to help." Jessie used the corner of the rag to dab the skin dry before she folded the cloth and set it on the table. Larkin laughed cruelly. "Prosody Russum percent. I don't know where you came from, but you can take yourself back there right now." "Larkin, you take that back," Dorcas said. "I'm not here for you." Jessie shot back at him. "I'm here for Molly and Maddie. You are not welcome here. Leave this property." "Now, Larkin, that's enough," Dorcas erupted. "You're acting like a madman. Jessie can stay in the lodge." "I don't want her here, or you for that matter. Both of you can leave me and my children alone." "But they're not just yours, are they?" Jessie said. "I'm here because I made a promise to my best friend. A friend that left you behind in a life that she despised." Jessie blinked several times as fresh pain shafted through her. Anger was an easier emotion to deal with, and so she pulled on that, meeting fire with fire. "I'm amazed that Mary chose you because I cannot for the life of me ever see what she saw in you." Jessie could see that her words had hurt him by the way he flinched. For just a fleeting moment, she saw real sorrow in his eyes, before the blue flame of anger roared to life. Then he turned and stalked out of the back door. She listened as his boots moved along the wooden decking. Her eyes drifted closed as she let out a sigh. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That was unkind and unnecessary." Dorcas clicked her tongue. "A lot of this is unkind, but he had it coming. Jessie, he's been madder than a wet hen ever since poor Mary died. Today is the first time he's said her name out loud in a while." She busied herself washing the dish that had held the water. "He's not normally so belligerent, and when he did get ornery, Mary was usually the one to turn him around until he came out of it." "Where we grew up, there wasn't much that scares us," Dorcas laughed. "Mary always said as much. Can I make you a drink or something to eat?" Jessie spun around at the sound of footsteps outside the window, but instead of the incensed face she expected, another woman entered, trailed by a young girl who immediately caught Jessie's attention. Dorcas was introducing Martha, who held the dual roles of cook for the lumberjacks and caretaker of the house. But Jessie found herself distracted, her heart thudding in her chest. The small girl had stunning red hair, woven into lengthy braids that lay on each shoulder, her eyes an intense green. A sprinkling of freckles adorned her button-like nose. As Dorcas's voice gradually faded, Jessie knelt at the girl's level. She let out a soft sigh. "Oh my," she whispered. "Looking at you, it's like seeing a reflection of your mama. You must be Molly." The young girl froze, her eyes swiftly shifting from Dorcas to Martha, before she abruptly turned and dashed out of the room, mirroring her father's exit just moments earlier. Jessie watched her go. None of what had transpired in the past 10 minutes was how she'd envisioned her arrival to Whispering Pines to pan out. Dorcas dropped heavily into the chair at the head of the table. "Well, now you've seen what you're up against, Jessie. I won't blame you if you want to turn around and head right back to New York." Chapter 7. The evening air was fresh and crisp, and a gentle breeze sighed through the trees that surrounded Larkin's house. He sat on the bench that his grandfather had forged from one of the first trees he ever felled, or so the family lore went. Sounds of the forest swirled around him, an occasional wolf's howl punctuating his thoughts. The words of the newcomer, Jessie Driscoll, had struck a chord, much as they were probably intended to. The worst part was they echoed something his beloved Mary might have said during his tempestuous moods. Larkin and Mary had fallen hard and fast for each other, two fiery spirits that often resulted in spectacular arguments. Yet what he loved most about their disputes was the sweet reconciliation that followed. From his seat, he could see across the yard. A sliver of moonlight illuminated the area, yet he knew he could navigate his surroundings even if shrouded in darkness. The upper window of the small lodge at the edge of the forest glowed faintly. Earlier, he'd slunk around the yard instead of going in for supper, mortified that he'd insulted both his mother and Mary's oldest friend in one fell swoop. Truth was, he was too ashamed to face either of them, partly because he knew his father would have scolded him for being so blatantly rude. Years of living alongside the wilderness had honed Larkin's senses. At the snap of a twig, followed by the scuff of a boot, he was instantly on his feet, rifle hoisted onto his shoulder. It was Griff who emerged from the shadows. Griff didn't miss a beat as he stepped onto the porch. "I can smell the whiskey off you from over here," he muttered. "You'll be lucky if you hit bear scat with that toy gun of yours." Larkin rolled his eyes and dropped back into his seat. "It's past your bedtime, old man." Griff ruffled Larkin's hair before sitting down next to him. "I can still outshoot you, boy. Why are you sulking out here?" Larkin scowled. I'm not sulking, I'm contemplating. What's the difference? I'm contemplating hiring a new chief, Larkin muttered, earning a rare chuckle from Griff. From what I hear, you're sulking over the smackdown our new guest gave you earlier. Larkin shot Griff a sidelong glance. The older man's profile was shadowed in the dim light. What did you hear? Larkin told himself he should be accustomed to the gossip circulating his business, but his curiosity got the better of him. She's in the lodge, I see. Larkin narrowed his eyes, but chose to ignore the evasion. That's right, making herself well and truly comfortable. She's seen a widower and thinks I'll be easy prey. What makes you think that? Griff asked. My mother already sent her the money for a train ticket. You know how much of a soft heart Dorcas has. She takes in all sorts of waifs and strays because she wants to make the world a better place. Now that woman has this house in her sights and is making herself comfortable in the lodge. It's just a matter of time before she asks for more money. I've seen her type before. Griff contemplated him for a moment before responding. Martha told me that Jessie insisted on making up her own bedding over at the lodge rather than have Martha do it. She sent her away. She even gave back the excess $40 left over from what your mama sent her because she traveled here third class, not first. Griff folded his arms and leaned back against the bench, his gaze fixed on Larkin. That doesn't strike me as someone here just for money. Larkin chewed his lip thoughtfully, his gaze settling once more on the cabin. The lights were being extinguished, and he wondered, somewhat bitterly, if she would be able to sleep. I saw her when she stepped off that train, Larkin, scared as a kitten in a doghouse. He endured. When she thought Robbie was going to be dragging her off somewhere to get up to no good, she thumped that boy faster than you can shake a stick. The girl has a backbone. I'd hazard a guess that she's been through a lot. I can also tell you that when she met your children tonight, she had tears in her eyes. As much as you might not want to hear it, or didn't ask for my opinion, the fact remains. Those children need a mother. But I don't need a wife, Larkin retorted. Griff leaned forward so that he could glare at Larkin, the light from the kitchen casting a resolute look on his face. No one said you're getting a wife. This isn't about you, Larkin. This is about your children and their mother's best friend trying to find their way through a mutual loss. What if they get attached to her and then she leaves? I can't do that to them when they've just lost their mama. Griff shook his head, incredulous. You don't want her to stay now, but you're worried she might leave? He chuckled. I think you're getting a bit far ahead of yourself here, son. The way I hear it, you've got some apologizing to do first before the girl even thinks about staying. With that, Griff pushed to his feet. You know, I'm too long in the tooth to be dealing with this. If your father lived long enough to meet Mary, he would have liked her. I'd stake a month's salary on it. Seeing that little girl sock Robbie Peters in the face would have tickled him pink, and I think he would have appreciated her sass too. Good night, Larkin. Larkin watched as his father's oldest friend made his way off the porch towards the bunkhouse. John Spriggs had offered Griff the use of the lodge years ago, in case he wanted to start a family of his own. But Griff had insisted that he was perfectly content in the bunkhouse with the rest of the men. Not for the first time, he wondered whether Griff knew that he was in love with Dorcas, though loyalty to John Spriggs would prevent him from being anything other than a loyal companion to her. Larkin saw the door to the bunkhouse open and then shut as Griff stepped inside. Larkin had spent a night or two in the bunkhouse in his younger days. It wasn't the most comfortable, but most of the men appreciated a bed and a blanket, with a hot meal at the end of the day. Larkin settled back against the bench. The lodge was now in darkness. He shook his head. His family might not see it, but he didn't trust this newcomer at all. Jessie woke when it was still dark. Perhaps it was the unfamiliar sounds of the forest or the different bed. Perhaps it was the turbulent events of arriving in Montana and then meeting Mary's family. Ever since she'd left the orphanage, she'd been surrounded by people. Even after Mary had left, Jessie could still hear the families that resided in the tenement building below her room. She heard babies crying and spouses arguing, as well as the drone of city noises in the cobbled streets far below. She washed in the cold bucket of water that had appeared in the small, rudimentary kitchen, and then watched the sky gradually lighten up, the shadows of the night edging back as the sun rose in a glorious array of colors. She stepped out of the front door and took her first proper look at the lumber yard as the sun made its majestic appearance over the treetops, gilding the distant peaks of the mountains, their snow-capped summits ablaze with the dawn's golden light. Jessie paused to take in the panorama unfolding before her eyes. Stretching out before her were the sturdy buildings of the lumber yard, the expansive barn, the homely bunkhouse, the industrious sawmill, and the practical outhouses, standing like quiet sentinels in the early morning haze. Horses lazily poked their heads out of the stables, watching her with sleepy interest, while dogs lounged in the yard, their watchful eyes never straying far from her. The main house stood prominent, surrounded by meticulously tended gardens. Glacier lilies and forget-me-nots were already in bloom, adding splashes of color against the rustic backdrop of the property. Mary's home was far different from what she was accustomed to in the city. It was hard to reconcile this vast and open landscape and stunning backdrop becoming the home of the woman that Jessie knew and loved. She could hardly imagine her dear friend electing to live in such a place, far from the bustling streets they'd both known. Her stomach chose that moment to rumble, a stark reminder that she had gone almost 2 days without food. Last night, when Martha and Dorcas had shown her to the house, they'd tried to feed her, but she'd been exhausted. Dorcas had told her to come to the house first thing this morning for breakfast. Squaring her shoulders, she marched forward, letting herself into the empty yet homely kitchen. There was work to be done here, and she was prepared to begin, no matter how alien the setting seemed. She'd already set the fire in the stove and had fresh eggs cooking in the pan by the time Martha stepped into the kitchen. "I hope you don't mind," Jessie said quickly, adding coffee to a mug. "I'm starving. I can pay for the eggs and bread. It's just—" "You'll do no such thing," Martha returned, taking another mug for herself off the hook above the worktop. She poured fragrant coffee from the pan and lifted it in a toast to her. "I can't remember the last time someone was up early enough to make me a drink in the morning. Couldn't you sleep?" Jessie wrinkled her nose and gave a shake of her head. "Too quiet." Martha pulled the bread out of the pantry and began to slice it thinly. "It will take some getting used to. I can make sure the lodge is stocked up for you if you'd prefer." "I don't want to cause any trouble," Jessie said. Her words trailed off when she spotted Molly and Maddie in the doorway. Her smile was automatically warm. "Good morning, both." "Are you a new maid?" Maddie asked. Jessie shook her head. "No. Well, I don't know what I am." "You're up early," Martha said to them and beckoned them forward. "We heard someone in the kitchen," Molly said. Maddie glared at her for lying. "No, you saw the new woman in the yard and came and woke me in case she was up to no good." Jessie's lips twitched. Mary had instilled her big city suspicions into her children. "You have a lovely home," she told Molly. "I was admiring it." Molly shrugged and took a seat at the table, thanking Martha when she set a cup of milk down in front of both children. "Do you like eggs?" Jessie asked. "I made them just how your mama taught me." Maddie jerked his head so quickly that he upended the cup of milk. As the puddle spread out across the table, he yelled, "Now look what you made me do. I'm so stupid." And with that, he ran out of the back door. Molly glared at Jessie, then stood up and stomped after her brother. "I heard what you said to Papa. I don't want a new mama. I just want mine back." Jessie watched the procession of children leaving the house and then looked at Martha. Martha shrugged her shoulders. "This is what they've been like ever since Mary passed. You just need to give them time." Jessie looked through the window and sighed. She recognized their anger. She remembered the burning frustration at the unfairness of it all. She left the pan on the side and wiped her hands on her skirts as she stepped through the back door. The sun had started to burn off some of the haze, and Jessie could hear the rumble of men from the bunkhouse. The pair were at the fence line of the corral, their heads dipped close together. Jessie approached them slowly. She longed to scoop them up and hold them close, but they didn't know who she was. She was just a stranger who'd interrupted their already chaotic lives. Maybe she needed to try a different tack to get them to let her in a little. She reached the fence and leaned her arms on the top rail. Golly, it's so pretty here. She could see that they were steadfastly ignoring her, glaring obstinately ahead. I think it's the most beautiful place I've ever seen. New York is busy, the air is sooty, and the buildings are all grimy. When it snows, it soon turns black. Black snow? Maddie asked. Jessie nodded. Bet you get white snow here, huh? Sometimes it's so white it hurts my eyes, Molly admitted quietly. I would probably get lost if I tried to take a look around. Maybe you could show me around sometime if you're not too busy. Blue and green eyes watched her warily, though they both remained stubbornly mute. She pursed her lips. How many friends do you both have? Jessie saw the uncertainty on their faces over the unexpected question. She waited for them to reply. It took a little while, as if they were assessing where she was going with the question. This many, Maddie said and held up both hands, his fingers sticking out like star shapes. Jessie looked suitably impressed. And you, Molly? I do okay, she said. How many? More than Maddie? Her head dipped once, and a line formed between her brows. I had one friend, Jessie said, emotion constricting her throat so that her voice was a harsh whisper. Her name was Mary Patrick. She was fiercely loyal and such a kind person. I miss her so much that it hurts. Her eyes grew misty, and she didn't try to hold back the tears. No one could ever replace her, not in my life, and never in yours. But that doesn't mean that we can't help each other now, does it? Being here, it makes me feel a little closer to her. Molly turned as if to leave, but Jessie reached out and laid a hand on her shoulder. Nothing I say can make things easier for you, Molly. Nothing and no one can fill up that big hole in your heart. I'm so sorry that she died, but God takes the best ones first. I'm here because I want you both to help me. Molly turned then, tears of her own making wet tracks on her cheeks. You want us to help you? Your mother and I were inseparable right up until she left to come here. She fell in love with your pa, and that, as they say, was that. But I want to know about what happened to her since I last saw her. I mean, I know that she bore 2 beautiful children, she told them with a watery smile. But what did she like to do? Where were her favorite places here? I was wondering if you could both help me fill in the gaps. The children exchanged a look that conveyed a message only siblings would understand, though neither answered. Jessie pressed on. Maddie, why did you call yourself stupid? Because I'm so clumsy, he muttered, his chin on his chest. Jessie nodded as though digesting this news. Can I ask you a question? His little shoulder bumped upward. I guess. Promise not to stomp off, though. I need you both to listen to me for a few minutes. I wanted to tell you a little story, but first I want to ask you a really easy question. This time he angled his head, squinting up at her against the glare of the sun behind her. Okay. Was your mama stupid? His face contorted into an angry frown. She was not. I didn't think she was either, but she knocked over a pot once. Jessie undid the top button of her dress and tugged at the neckline of her dress to reveal a patch of skin on her shoulder that was a white and brown freckled pattern. Do you see this? Uh-huh. Maddie leaned in for a closer look. Molly did too. Your mama and I worked in the kitchen of the orphanage. Molly nodded sagely. She told me what it was like there, how you had to scrub and clean with soap that made your eyes sting. Jessie's mouth curved a little in memory. That's right. One day, we were put in charge of peeling potatoes. I was being told off by the mean old cook. The potatoes were too big for my hands, and I was making the peelings too thick. The cook said that thick peelings were wasting good potatoes. Your mama was rushing to make up for my clumsy peeling skills. She dumped the peeled potatoes into the big pot over the fire. I was standing by her, holding my peeled potatoes when her hand caught the edge of the pot and knocked it. The boiling water sloshed over the side and onto my shoulder. Now, I know because I look like a proper society lady. She dipped a mock curtsy, and Maddie giggled. It might not look like it, but I can swear like a sailor. Her eyes twinkled mischievously at them both, and Maddie slid a look at Molly, whose mouth was twitching in response. Papa said that Mama had a potty mouth that could make a cowpoke blush when the mood took her. Maddie giggled and cupped his hand over his mouth. Jessie fastened her button as she continued her story. It hurt like blazes. and I lit up that kitchen until the cook yelled at me that her ears were bleeding from my bad language. I'm not proud of it, but you hear things you're not meant to when growing up in 5 Points. She slapped my legs for the swearing, and that slap still didn't hurt as much as my scald. Your poor mama, she was so upset that she'd hurt me. But she didn't mean to catch the edge of the pot. It was an accident, just like when you knocked the cup over this morning. The 2 children were watching her rapturously. I'm not here to take over or to be your new mama. I already told you that no one could ever replace Mary Patrick, but I would like it if we could maybe become friends. Not right away. Getting to be friends can take time, but I really need some friends right now. Jessie leaned down, her hands on her thighs. Do you think that would be possible? Chapter 8. The sun was streaming through the windows as Larkin descended the staircase, his steps heavy with the weight of the new day. His eyes felt gritty from his poor sleep, his mind still warring with the quarrels from the day before and Griff's sage words. He could smell cooked food, though he found the kitchen unexpectedly calm. Dorcas, ensconced at the kitchen table, cradled a steaming cup of coffee, her presence lending a quiet warmth to the morning solitude. He had intended to apologize to her for the fiery words he'd unleashed in anger the previous day. But as he opened his mouth to speak, the sound of his children's laughter wafted through the open window, slicing through the tranquility of the moment. His gaze was drawn to the scene unfolding outside. Under the newcomer's watchful eye, his children were engaged in morning play. The sight sliced him to the quick, and he had to hold his breath against the rush of pain. When was the last time he'd heard those sounds? He'd almost forgotten the joy that it brought him. The tableau brought with it an onslaught of memories, each like salt to an open wound. Frustration simmered within Larkin as he clomped across the wooden porch, his gaze fixed on the pretty stranger who, much to his chagrin, hadn't left. He didn't need her here. He didn't need her stirring up his already tumultuous feelings, and he certainly didn't need her meddling with his children. "Miss," he bit out, his voice rough with irritation as he pulled Jessie to one side, away from the innocent ears of his children. "I believe I made it clear that you should leave." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with a harshness that he knew was excessive, but he couldn't help it. He was angry, and he wasn't afraid to show it. "There's no need for you to be here," he continued, his voice hardening. "I can take care of my children." Jessie merely shrugged, her gaze steady as she met his. "No one ever said you couldn't," she retorted, her voice calm in contrast to his heated tone. "But I know the pain of growing up without a mother, and so did Mary. We each made a promise. That's the end of it." "You listen here," he ground out. "This is my house." Jessie leaned into him, her eyes lighting with a fire that matched his. "Are you really that stubborn that you won't accept a helping hand, Mr. Spriggs? I can assure you that I'm not here for your money, and certainly not for the likes of you." Her disdain in that last word irked, but his rebuttal was cut off by his mother's voice, gentle but firm. She had followed him outside. "Larkin," she cautioned, her gaze shifting pointedly to the children who were watching the altercation with wide-eyed curiosity. His heart clenched as he followed her gaze, realizing his mistake. He had let his anger spill over in front of his children, and the guilt of it stung. His mouth flattened, and he grabbed her by the wrist, pulling her further around the side of the building. She didn't fight him until they were out of sight of the young, impressionable eyes. She yanked on her wrist and rubbed the area as she said, "Is this how you convinced Mary to stay here with you? By brute force and ignorance?" "She didn't have your smart mouth for a start," he fired back. "I don't want you here." "You've made that abundantly clear, but at the risk of your enormous ego, I am not here to help you. I'm here because I once made a promise to Mary Patrick that our children wouldn't ever know the pain of growing up without a mother." Larkin narrowed his eyes. Making such a promise like that would be something that Mary would do. She'd spoken often of her childhood friend, though he'd imagined the woman to be a soft, kind woman, not this fiery vixen who'd squared up to him. "Prosody %. What are you hoping to achieve here, Miss Driscoll?" Her head moved back as her brows met. "Achieve? Nothing. I don't want my children getting attached to you. for you just to disappear on them once more. I don't want a wife to replace them. Eventually, you're going to want to marry. All women do. What happens when you tire of this madness? Jessie folded her arms. You are the most exasperating man. Answer the question, Miss Driscoll. Her sigh spoke volumes. I made Mary a promise. That's why I'm here. I'll stay for as long as those beautiful children need me, not a moment longer. If that takes years, then that's how it shall be. As for the notion that I'll marry, apart from Griff, the men around here are rude and uncouth, so you can immediately put that out of your head. Dorcas has kindly offered me the lodge for however long I need it. I have no money to pay you rent, but I am a hard worker. Dorcas has suggested that we could exchange my cleaning and doing some housekeeping for bed and board until I find work. Martha said that there may be jobs in the nearby town. I'm aware of how it may appear to you, my showing up here out of the blue. I'm not normally spontaneous. That was all Mary, usually with me trotting behind her trying to slow her down, she said with a soft smile. And he felt his own mouth responding in response. He knew what she meant. Mary would get an idea in his head and throw all caution to the winds. Jessie cocked her head. I'm not here to burden you further, Mr. Spriggs. He could feel his anger ebb as he saw the fight in her slide away, and he realized that she was being as open and honest with him as she could be. She continued, I want to help. I could never replace Mary and would never want to because that would mean she was never here. I want to keep the memory of her alive in their minds and get to know her life here too. Larkin scratched at his chin. It hadn't occurred to him that she would be grieving too, and that added to his guilty burden. But the memory of what she'd said to him yesterday was still raw. I don't like it, he said gruffly. Her shoulder popped up. I know. But it's been a while since I saw them look that happy, he admitted quietly. Her mouth quirked at the edges, though she refrained from gloating too much, and he was glad for it. They're lovely children. Molly looks so much like Mary that it takes my breath away, she replied softly. His heart squeezed, and he shifted his gaze to the tree line. He couldn't listen to any more sentimentality, though it seemed that she was one step ahead of him already. I think it best if we just stay out of each other's way. We don't like each other, and that's okay. I will be civil to you, and I'd like it if you were at least semi-polite to me. He looked at her then, at the flinty coldness in her eyes, and he nodded. You took the words right out of my mouth. Larkin? Dorcas was standing at the corner of the house, peering around the edge at the adversaries. Are you having breakfast? Not now, Ma, he said gruffly, as the sawmill rumbled to life across the yard. There was too much to be done, and his appetite seemed to have vanished in the presence of the unwelcome newcomer. He staked Jessie with a hard look. You can stay at the lodge in exchange for helping my mother and Martha. If I get even the slightest whiff of my children not being happy with you, I will put you on the first train back to where you came from myself. There is no need to find a job unless you want to. If you do, I'd be happy to speak to the townsfolk. My family has a long-standing reputation that might grease the wheels for you. She cleared her throat, her cool smile not reaching her eyes. Thank you. He bobbed his head, boots crunched against the gravel as he walked towards the sawmill, the scent of fresh wood and the hum of activity filling the air, easing his discomposure. He was glad to have work to distract him. The woman annoyed him no end. Mornin', Larkin. Griff greeted him as he stood by the wide-open doors of the mill, his brow raised in question. You two made friends yet? Hardly, he replied tersely, his gaze drifting back to where Jessie was talking animatedly with Dorcas and Martha. He didn't like having to give in, but there was something about her that unsettled him. It seems that we may have reached an accord. Griff lifted his chin. Then that's progress, at least. Larkin spotted Robbie Peters amongst the men drifting out of the bunkhouse ready for work and remembered what he'd tried to do to Jessie in town. He couldn't afford the impropriety of his men with the townsfolk, particularly those associated with him. It was a risk to his reputation, something he held dear in this small community. He jabbed a finger at him. Robbie, a word? He'd deal with the young buck and then get on with his day. And in the back of his mind, He would find a way to ensure that Miss Jessie Driscoll went away, he vowed silently. He didn't need anyone interfering in his life. With his work, his children, and the ever-present ache of his broken heart to contend with, there was simply no room for anyone else. Chapter 9. In the month that had passed since she had arrived at Whispering Pines, Jessie found herself falling inexorably in love with the rugged, untamed beauty of Montana. Meadows were filled with pops of color from fireweed and yellow bell, carpeting the rolling hills to where they climbed up from the foothills. Growing accustomed to the boundless sky, sprawling wilderness, and the industrious hum of life in the lumber yard had stolen her heart in ways she had never expected, and she could understand why Mary had chosen to build a life for herself here. The days were getting longer, and it seemed to her that the lumberjacks never stopped. She'd grown to learn that they worked this way as they had to make the most of the warmer, dry weather. Come wintertime, snow and inclement weather made it almost impossible for the men to harvest the trees. Hauling them out of the forest was dangerous work at the best of times, but deep snow hindered progress. Maddie had been quick to warm to her. He might be a copy of his father with his dark hair and deep blue eyes, but he had a warm sense of humor that gave Jessie a belly laugh at least once a day, and the little boy seemed to want to make her laugh. Just yesterday, he'd sat by her when she'd been practicing writing with the children, his tongue clamped in between his teeth as he concentrated. Molly was older and much warier, not just like her mama in looks, but also in her nature. Still, it seemed the young girl was walking away from her less often, and Jessie marked that up as a win. Dorcas and Martha had been an unexpected bonus for her. They were kind and gentle women who worked just as hard as the men who labored in the mill. Larkin Spriggs had kept to his word. He was polite but remote, and Jessie made a point of keeping out of his way. She'd made the little lodge a bit more homely, adding in touches of blankets and fresh flowers. She cooked for herself every night and spent her evenings on the little rocking chair as the sun slid behind the mountains. Being here, where Mary had lived and loved, had eased the ache in her heart a little more with each passing day. Jessie had gotten into the habit of starting her day early, more often in the kitchen before Martha was. It became a habit that Jessie would cook for the family and Martha prepared food for the lumberjacks in the bunkhouse. On one such morning, she found herself in conversation with Dorcas. The matronly woman had a keen eye, and it hadn't missed the wear and tear on the dress that Jessie wore daily. With a generous heart and a practical mind, Dorcas suggested, "Jessie, dear, you should get yourself a new dress. That one has seen better days." Jessie looked down at her dress, a little embarrassed, but shook her head with a soft smile. "That's too kind of you, Dorcas, but I can't accept. I'm already living here without paying a cent." Dorcas waved her hand dismissively, a warm smile curving her lips. "My dear girl, you've more than paid for your keep. You've been a whirlwind of help around the house, and the children have taken to you like ducks to water. I don't think I've seen them this happy since." Her voice trailed off, and for a moment, a shadow of sorrow crossed her eyes. She quickly blinked it away and continued, "Anyway, if you don't want to buy a dress, then at least let me give you money to buy some nice fabric. You can make yourself something fresh and new." Jessie chewed on her lower lip, weighing the suggestion. It was fair, and the thought of crafting her own dress was appealing. After a few beats, she nodded, her eyes meeting Dorcas's in quiet gratitude. "All right, Dorcas, I'll do that, thank you." Sheeling. She waited until she had an afternoon when Dorcas was visiting with one of the families who lived further off the timber mill yard and had taken the children with her. The walk into Copper Creek town had taken a little longer than she'd guessed, but she'd had a fine time in the haberdashery, choosing a pretty green fabric for a dress, and Dorcas's generosity even allowed enough money for her to buy extra material to be able to make a shirt and skirt like she'd seen the other local women wear. It might not be as fancy as the taffeta ruffles and bustles of New York, but she wasn't in New York anymore. Striking out for home, her wicker basket casually slung over her arm, she didn't pay much heed to the sun's position or how the shadows of the buildings were beginning to elongate. It wasn't until she had left the town far behind, accompanied only by the rustling whispers of the forest and the tumbling waters of the nearby river, that she realized the day was waning later than she'd anticipated. She scolded herself softly, realizing that she should have been home by now, getting a start on supper. The canopy of trees overhead blocked out the remaining shards of sunlight, casting the winding road ahead into a gloomy shadow. Around the bend, the path disappeared into an unsettling murkiness. The rough squawk of crows was made more jarring by the absence of the usual songbirds, deepening the oppressive silence. She chided herself, knowing her nerves were just being silly. She had traversed this road often enough to know her way back to Whispering Pines, but a nagging reminder tugged at her thoughts. She had always had company before, and she had always been comfortably seated in a wagon, alongside either Martha or Dorcas. She was so focused on making progress down the road that she didn't hear the approach of horse hooves at first. It was the familiar voice calling her name, rounding the corner, that caused her to almost jump into the shrubbery at the side of the road in fright. "What do you think you're doing?" Larkin barked at her, reining in so quickly that his horse's hooves slid on the loose surface. In response to his rudeness, Jessie strode right past him. "Jessie, come back here at once!" Larkin called out, his horse dancing about on the road, unnerved by his upset rider. "I'm not talking to you when you're in this mood," she shouted back over her shoulder. "What are you doing here?" Larkin rode up alongside her, his horse matching its pace to her furious stride. "My mother sent me looking for you. She's frantic with worry because of the late hour. Ma has had the men out scouring the woods for you. Do you know how dangerous it is to be out here alone at night?" His words sent a ripple of alarm through her, but she didn't slow her pace. "It was Martha who suggested you may have gone to town to spend the allowance that my mother gave you." The scorn dripping from his voice in his last sentence reminded Jessie that he still believed she was only here for the money. The assumption stung bitterly as she felt she'd made significant progress with him since her arrival. "Then I will apologize to your mother when I get back. It was not my intention to cause her any worry." "Why did you walk to town? We have horses that you could have used." She scowled up at him. "You're the one who keeps insinuating I'm only here to take advantage of you and your family. I didn't want to overstep any boundaries by assuming I could simply take a horse for my own use. Besides, God gave me 2 feet and a head for a reason. I needed to make my way into town, and I wanted some alone time." "This isn't the city," he snapped, leaning down to grasp for her shoulder. She sidestepped him and continued to walk. "For heaven's sake, stop walking away from me. I have better things to do than chase after a silly woman who doesn't realize that dangers are lurking in this forest." "I've been to town often enough and never encountered a single wild animal," she retorted, tossing the words over her shoulder. "Because wolves and bears are active when the sun is at full strength," Larkin mocked. He nudged his horse so that they trotted ahead, then deliberately placed the animal across her path, forcing her to stop and glare up at him. "It's in the evening when they come out to hunt. Now stop wasting time and come back with me." He leaned down and offered his hand. Jessie's heart thumped wildly, and she automatically shook her head. "No, I'm fine walking, thank you." She ducked under the horse's chin and continued walking. Larkin growled from somewhere behind her, and she heard the clutter of the horse's hooves. A glance over her shoulder told her that he had now dismounted and was leading the animal as he marched after her. "You don't even have a gun on you." Larkin pointed at the basket she held. "I was there when Griff told you not to go off the property without a weapon. How do you expect to defend yourself against anything, let alone a wild animal?" Jessie knew that he was referring to the dangers such as those on 2 feet, as she'd experienced with Robbie Peters, as well as the wild animals. She pushed back the revulsion that his words brought forward, and her voice lost a little of its force. She looked back along the darkened lane and said in a small voice, "I'm fine." Larkin huffed in annoyance. "You've made your point," he said. "Now can we get back to the yard?" She stared at him for a moment, wanting to prove to this bully that she could manage this task on her own. After all, she'd survived navigating the streets of New York, although she had never ventured out alone after dark. The only women walking the streets of New York at night made their money in a very different industry. But it was dark, and she'd already caused him an inconvenience and upset Dorcas. She gave in with a small nod. "All right, then," she allowed. Without asking permission, Larkin tucked his hands under her arms and lifted her into the saddle, as though she weighed no more than a bag of feathers. She shimmied forward in the saddle as he swung up behind her. "Is that okay?" he asked, and she felt the vibrations of his voice where his chest met her back. "Yes," she muttered. "Quit wiggling then, will you?" Jessie immediately stilled her movements where she'd been trying to sit further forward as she became aware of his thighs pressing against her. They rode in silence for a few minutes, and Jessie realized that sitting against Larkin was entirely different from the experience of riding with Griff, although she did feel safer, at least from any predators that might be lurking in the dark woods. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Larkin said. "Has Robbie Peters given you any more trouble?" "Not at all," Jessie replied. The few times she'd seen the man around the lumberyard, he'd quickly averted his gaze and hurried away from her. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," Larkin said. Something moved in the undergrowth to the right, and the horse shied sideways, knocking Jessie off balance. The horse's ears swiveled back and forth, and her heart jumped into her throat. "What was that?" she whispered. Larkin's arms clamped firmly around her waist, securing her tightly to him, as the thrashing in the woods got louder. "I don't know," he said into her ear, "but hold on tight, 'cause I'm not waiting around to find out. Hia." His movements were fluid as the horse surged forward with his shout, while she fumbled around underneath the basket in front of her, seeking to grip the edge of the saddle. His grip on her ensured that her body moved with his when he leaned into the corner, and the horse raced onwards, as sure-footed as its rider that navigated the dark road. Blood pounded in her ears as they flew through the darkness, and she realized then just how much peril she'd have been in had Larkin not come along when he did. She'd been foolish to argue with him just to try and prove a point. By the time Larkin reined to a halt in the yard, Jessie's heart pounded in her chest. She'd never been so glad to see the welcoming lights glowing in the windows of Whispering Pines Lodge. Still breathing heavily, Larkin swung himself out of the saddle and dropped to the ground beside her. "It's okay," he said when she didn't move. He held his hands out to her. "You're safe now." Normally, she would have held on to her independence, but she knew her legs were still frozen in place and was grateful for his strength as he helped her down. His hands stayed around her shoulders as if assuring himself that she wasn't about to keel over. Slowly, she let out a breath through pursed lips. "Thank you, Larkin." In the darkness, the planes of his face were a play of shadow and light. He looked down at her, and she was aware that he was studying her closely. She swallowed again, this time for a different kind of danger. "Next time," he said roughly, "you don't go anywhere without a gun, and take a horse with you. Do you understand me?" Mutely, she nodded. Dorcas and Martha appeared on the back porch. Dorcas expressed her relief, and Jessie lifted a hand to wave at them weakly. "Mama keeps brandy in the house," Larkin told her. "Make sure she gives you some. It'll help with the shock." With that, he grabbed the reins of the horse and stalked off into the darkness, leaving Jessie to make her way on shaky legs to the open arms of Dorcas and Martha. Chapter 10. July brought with it a blast of heat, baking the ground until it was hard and drying up the lake. Snowcaps retreated to just a dusting at the very peaks of the mountains, and the foothills turned pink with the bitterroot blooms. Larkin was sitting at the kitchen table one evening. Dorcas was at the other end, with Molly and Maddie tucking into their supper with cheerful gusto, their spirits noticeably higher. The atmosphere was one of quiet contentment, he decided, as he looked around his family, chewing slowly. The back door stood ajar, allowing the gentle breeze of the summer evening to steal inside, carrying with it the sweet scent of blooming flowers. It was a pleasant, soothing sensation, but it was not enough to stop Larkin's thoughts from wandering. The transformation in each of their demeanor he attributed, in part, to Jessie. Her presence had brought a new energy to Whispering Pines, one that seemed to lift the mood of everyone around. His gaze shifted from the children to the open door, his mind straying to the woman who lived in the little lodge by the creek. He couldn't help but wonder what Jessie was doing this evening. Should he have extended an invitation for her to dine with them? She seemed content enough with her solitude, yet a small part of him wished she were here, sharing in their laughter, her voice mingling with theirs. His musings were interrupted by Dorcas's voice. "The summer fair will be upon us in a few weeks," she remarked, her eyes twinkling with amusement as she glanced his way. "It's all anyone was talking about at the town hall today. Jane was telling me that there was a record number of stalls in attendance at Windy Ridge. The annual fair was Copper Creek's biggest event, with local farmers, ranchers, and mine owners all converging on the town to enjoy the sights and frivolities that the traveling fair and circus brought with it. In previous years, he'd looked forward to catching up with people that were separated by work and distance for the rest of the year. As a youth, he would relish the chance to meet pretty girls for a dance and maybe steal a kiss or two. Last year, Mary had gently declined the invitation to the well-attended affair. The entire township would typically pour their efforts into making the event a grand spectacle, culminating in an enchanting evening of melodies and merry dances that would go on until the sun was rising the next morning. At the time, he hadn't known that Mary was grappling with her health, that she'd been silently fighting a battle against a relentless illness. He now understood that she'd gone to great lengths to conceal the severity of her condition from him. The realization was a painful one, gnawing at his heart with a regret that refused to abate. Maddie piped up, his voice brimming with the excitement of shared secrets. "Jessie told me she's never been to a fair or a dance," he said, his words hurrying over one another in their eagerness to be spoken. "Don't they have dances where she's from?" Molly snorted. "Of course they do, Maddie. People have dances everywhere, don't they, Grandma?" Larkin waited for the explosion of his son's temper, but the little boy simply shrugged and continued eating. "That's right," Dorcas replied. "But in New York, where Jessie and your mama lived, they have grand theaters that have lots of people playing instruments." Larkin divided a look between his children, stunned when there was no overt reaction from either of them at the mention of Mary. Dorcas continued and said to Maddie, "I imagine Jessie was too busy working at the factory to be able to attend dances. Well, she can come with us, can't she, Pa? I wasn't planning on attending this year either," he confessed, looking at his mother. Percent. He had no interest in such festivities. It would only serve as a painful reminder of times gone by for him, but the disappointment that washed over Molly's face was palpable. Studying her for a moment, he ventured a question. "Molly, would you like to go?" A warm smile danced on her lips as she looked up at him, her eyes sparkling with delight. It was so reminiscent of Mary that it caught his breath, and he knew that he'd missed seeing the happiness on her face. "Yes, Pa," she answered quietly. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, his eyes moving to Dorcas. His mother took a forkful delicately, chewed and swallowed as he mulled it over. "The children have been very good these past few weeks, don't you think? They deserve a day at the fair for their good behavior." He could easily refuse her request, but he had to admit that his house had been much more harmonious during these past few weeks. It must have been more than a month since he'd helped Dorcas clear up a mess that one of Maddie's tempers had caused. "I'd be lying if I said that the house hadn't been calmer," Larkin said, albeit reluctantly. He leaned back in his chair. "You must do your chores around the yard and in the house," he said finally, and the little sounds of excited joy his children emitted made his heart swell. He raised a finger. "But if your grandmother or Martha or Jessie even hints that you've been misbehaving or are tardy with jobs, then you'll not be going to the fair." Both Molly and Maddie nodded dutifully, and his mother's approving smile brought out a reluctant one of his own. The children's words stirred something within him, a slow realization that perhaps this year's event at Copper Creek could hold a different meaning for them all. Later that night, under the starlit Montana sky, Larkin found solace on his porch and tried to gather his thoughts. The quietness of the night was broken only by the sporadic call of a wolf that echoed through the wilderness, and the ghostly hooting of a nearby owl, eerie melodies that seemed to echo his turmoil. The sound of footsteps intruded upon his quietude. Griff approached, concern etched across his craggy face in the pale moonlight. "Saw ya sitting out here by your lonesome," he began, resting his elbow on the porch's wooden railing. "You okay, Larkin?" There was an unease in Larkin's soul, a gnawing realization of the world shifting around him. He felt adrift in a sea of change, the people around him learning to live without Mary, her absence becoming an accepted reality. It felt like a betrayal to him, as if their healing was an offense against her memory. "There's nothing wrong," Larkin insisted, his voice gruff with feigned indifference. But Griff wasn't on to be so easily dismissed. "Don't lie to me, Larkin. I've known you too long for that," Griff challenged, his gaze never leaving Larkin's. Eventually, his facade crumbled under Griff's persistent gaze. His words tumbled out in a quiet confession. "It's like no one else misses her. The kids, they're all excited about the fair. That was Mary's favorite, you know." "Why'd you agree to take them then?" he asked, his question lingering in the cool night air. Larkin looked out into the darkness, the image of his daughter's bright smile flooding his mind. "Molly," he admitted, his heart aching with the recollection. "She was so excited." "Mary would be glad, Larkin," Griff reasoned, breaking through his reverie. "Your children deserve to experience life and be happy." A hint of a smile played on Griff's lips. "Maybe you should try it sometime, too." The gently challenging tone brought Larkin's gaze around in a scowl. Griff chuckled dryly, his laugh like stones rattling in a tin, and he tipped his hat and ambled off toward the bunkhouse. Chapter 11. "He's asleep," Jessie murmured, stroking the soft cheek of the slumbering child laying in her lap. Only minutes ago, he'd been protesting at his father putting him up into the wagon, claiming that he wasn't tired and he wanted to stay and dance some more. She could still hear the music and raucous laughter from the bustling town hall as they reached the sleepy edges of Copper Creek. "I'm not surprised," Larkin replied. "He hasn't stopped all day." "It's been a long day," she reasoned, looking down at the young boy. The heat of the evening clung to her skin. Her body was weary, but her heart was light. "But a good one. I'd say that the fair has been a grand success." Dorcas mentioned how happy the mayor was with the turnout. "I've never seen such a sight with the stalls and the salesmen. All the games," her voice trailed off, a small smile dancing across her mouth. In the wagon ahead, Dorcas, Martha, and Molly chattered away as Griff drove the wagon, their voices echoing softly through the still night as they left the town behind. The night was illuminated by the subtle glow of the lamp hanging off the wagons, casting an erratic dance of light and shadows upon the dusty road ahead. Above, the moon had staked its claim in the inky firmament, cradled amongst a blanket of twinkling stars. The silver moonlight seemed to drape over the earth, casting an ethereal glow on the landscape, turning the ordinary into something extraordinarily beautiful. "You enjoyed it?" "Very much," she said with a chuckle, "though I didn't have much of a clue about how to dance." "You looked like an old hat at it, especially when you were dancing with Davy and then with Red." Larkin's tone was guarded, and she looked at him. His hat shadowed his face, lending a dangerous light to his eyes that sent a shiver racing along her spine. He broke the look, returning his gaze to the ribbon of road ahead, and she puzzled over the bizarre feelings rolling through her. "I didn't want to, but Dorcas wouldn't let me sit on the side and watch. She insisted that my new dress needed to be shown off." Jessie had reluctantly stood before being swept into the crowded space that had been cleared in the town hall, and the piano and banjo plucked out jaunty tunes. "Ma has a habit of getting people to do things that they don't want to," he said sardonically. "I wouldn't call it dancing. It was being moved about by them mostly," she laughed. "I stepped on Red's feet twice. I'd say, judging by the smitten look on Red's face, he didn't mind a bit that you had two left feet." Her brows shot up as she stared at him. She hadn't even known Larkin was in the town hall, let alone watching her. For most of the day, he'd been occupied by other men keen to talk business, whilst the women and children entertained themselves at the stalls and spent their coin. His absence had been noted as the evening had moved more into music and the band had struck up on the makeshift stage in the corner of the town hall. She assumed it was because he'd kept a low profile for most of the past year, and people were happy to see him. It occurred to her now that maybe the fair hadn't been all that enjoyable for him, considering how Molly had told her that it had been Mary's favorite event on the calendar. In the darkness, she studied his profile, a silent question on her lips. If he was aware of her scrutiny, he didn't let it be known. She longed to ask him how he was, but the fear of stirring Maddie from his peaceful slumber held her tongue. The connection with the children had come surprisingly easy. Their hearts, like hers, were starved for love and nurturing. Now, they had forged an undeniable bond, a sturdy foundation of trust and understanding, built with love and patience that she believed would withstand any storm. But Larkin was an entirely different entity. His countenance was a fortress, guarded by an ever-present prickliness that made her tread lightly whenever in his company. The air between them was often laced with caution, as though one wrong word would shatter the delicate peace they had managed to cultivate. She knew better than to push him into expressing himself. Larkin Spriggs was a man of silence, burying his troubles deep within and offering no sign of struggle to the world. He would never admit that he found the day challenging, much like she would never confess her own difficulties. They were both stalwart stones in a river, unyielding to the current. Perhaps, she mused, that was why they struggled to connect, too similar in their stubbornness to reach out, choosing silence over confession, afraid of the vulnerabilities that came with honesty. Yet she longed to understand him, to break through his stony exterior, and perhaps find a kindred spirit beneath. "I feel I must warn you about Bill Coulter," his voice rumbled, startling her from her study of him. "Pardon? I saw you." He flicked a glance at her, then looked ahead once more. "When Ma sent Griffin me to fetch the wagon, you were outside with him, standing close together, laughing," he added. "I'd gone outside for some cooler air," she admitted. "Mr. Coulter followed me out to make sure I was okay." "Yeah, well, you ought to take care around him. Bill Coulter is a wealthy man used to getting his own way. He is a wily old goat." A bubble of laughter rose in her throat. He was perfectly pleasant, Larkin. This time, he fixed her with a glittering look, and her breath caught. "He's had 3 wives. 1 died, 1 divorced. The 3rd ran off, or so he says." "Thank you for the warning, but you have nothing to be concerned about." "Yes, I do," he muttered. "My children have grown very attached to you in the short while you've been here. I knew that this would happen, that you would get bored and start looking for a husband." Jessie swallowed and was grateful for the darkness as she felt the heat of her temper in her cheeks. She focused on Maddie for a moment and felt movement as Larkin shifted as though uncomfortable. She stroked his dark hair back and left her hand resting on his side. "At the risk of sounding redundant, Mr. Spriggs," she murmured, "you have nothing to be concerned about. Bill Coulter was very complimentary about how I looked this evening. I don't mind admitting that I was flattered by his accolades on the dress and how pretty my hair looked." She raised her eyes, meeting fire with fire. "A woman likes to know that she is still attractive, no matter her age. But I have no intention of abandoning Maddie and Molly now that they've let me in. I worked too hard to walk away from them now. Mary would never forgive me for breaking their hearts and reneging on my promise." He scoffed. "Your promise. All of this from a childhood memory." "Are we back here again, Larkin?" she asked him, disappointment flooding her. "I'd hoped that we were on civil terms at least by now." "There will be more like Bill Coulter in the future, Jessie. Are you going to turn them all down and forego the chance of finding a husband and having a family of your own? I'm not sure that that is fair to you, no matter how honorable your promise is." She fell silent at that, with the gentle clip-clop of the horse's hooves against the dirt road breaking up the stillness. She'd not considered much beyond helping Dorcas and Larkin raise Maddie and Molly to try and fill the void of having lost Mary. Maddie stirred a little in her lap, and she pulled him closer. Her gaze wandered up toward the moon. She couldn't think about what she would be giving up, to know what it felt like to love, to bear a child of her own. She loved Molly and Maddie already and felt closer to Mary than she had the longest time living in the town that she'd called home. Her dream of keeping their mother alive was being realized, and for now, she knew that that was enough. "I'm not going anywhere." His gaze was fixed on the road ahead, lost in a world of thoughts she could only guess. She wanted to bridge the distance, to offer him a piece of her understanding, but words eluded her. And so they sat in silence, two hearts bearing their burdens, seeking solace in the quiet comfort of the Montana night. Chapter 12. Larkin made his way across the yard, blue eyes scanning the burnished mountain tops. In the grandest tapestry of the year, fall in Montana was a masterpiece, a time when nature showcased her artistry in hues of vibrant golds and rich siennas. The landscape became a canvas brushed with the fiery colors of the season, beautifully contrasting against the steadfast evergreen of the pines and aspens. It was a sight to behold, a glory to the eye that never failed to steal one's breath away. Fatigue pulled at his bones as he stepped onto the porch. Amidst this splendor at this point in the season, the lumberyard hummed with a relentless rhythm. Each day was a race against the encroaching winter, an urgent dance to harness the sunlight's dwindling hours before the frosty jaws of winter clamped down, casting a frigid hush over the land. The men worked tirelessly from the moment the sun peeked over the horizon until it dipped its fiery head below the western edge of the world. The sound of axes and saws echoed in a well-tuned cadence throughout the valley. Today, he felt every inch of every tree trunk he'd hauled and split as he tried to outrun the impending chill of winter that would halt his work soon enough. He wanted to keep as many of the men on for as long as possible so that he'd have enough hands for the season next year. The blast of warmth from the kitchen hit him as he opened the back door. He stepped through and hung up his hat on the pegs in the wall, frowning into the empty space. Usually, Maddie and Molly would be eating supper, or at least come and greet him if he was late finishing, like tonight. He hooked his coat over the back of a chair and went in search of his family. He met Dorcas on the stairs, and the grave expression on her face brought a wave of anxiety through his chest. "What's the matter?" "Maddie," she said. The single word was enough to drive him the rest of the way up the stairs. He pulled up short as he reached his son's bedroom. Maddie was pale, tucked up under the covers. Jessie looked up as he stepped inside the room. Molly knelt at the bedside, patting his hand. "I thought he was getting better," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. The boy had been under the weather for a day or two. Dorcas had put it down to a noticeable change in the weather, bringing the usual coughs and colds with it, and Maddie had been brighter when Larkin had had his lunch earlier. Jessie wrung out the cloth that she was using to dab at his skin. "I thought so too, but he's got this fever now." "Should I send for the doctor?" "I don't think that he would do much more than Jessie is right now," Dorcas said from behind him where she'd followed him up the stairs. He took a turn this afternoon, claiming he had a bellyache. He was sick all over the kitchen floor. By the time I'd cleaned it up, he was lying on the sofa and shivering. Jessie brushed back Maddie's damp bangs. His son looked so small and vulnerable lying in his bed. Fear rolled through Larkin when he thought back to the days when Mary had suddenly taken to her bed. It was only then that he'd noticed how skinny she'd become and just how sick she'd been. The idea that he'd lose his son filled him with cold dread. Larkin walked around to the side of the bed and crouched down. Maddie's skin was hot, and his breathing was rapid. "Maddie, son, open your eyes." His heart stuttered when Maddie's lashes fluttered. Larkin met Jessie's relieved expression. "Pa, I'm here, son. I don't feel too good." Larkin's breath huffed out in a light laugh. "You don't look so good either." Maddie opened his eyes and blinked at the faces that watched him. He looked back at Jessie. "Will you stay here with me tonight and not go back to the log cabin?" She leaned forward and cupped his face in her hand. "I'm not going anywhere until you're better." Maddie offered up a small smile before he closed his eyes again. Jessie brushed her fingertips across his hair when his breathing evened out. "Poor little mite," Dorcas murmured. "You don't have to stay with him," Larkin said. He didn't want Jessie to feel obligated, but when he saw the hurt ripple through her expressive eyes, he knew he'd made a mistake in assuming that she'd be more comfortable back at her lodge. If he wakes, he'll be looking for her, Dorcas pointed out. Come on now, Larkin. Come and get some supper. I'm not hungry, Mama. You've worked since first light, Dorcas reminded him. The last thing I need is for you to get sick, too. Come on, Jessie, we'll see to Maddie whilst you eat. With an air of reluctance, Larkin stepped away from the small figure nestled in the bed. The sight of his little boy, so small and vulnerable in the vast expanse of the bed, tugged at his heartstrings. Casting one last lingering look at Jessie, he steeled himself and left the room. Dorcas followed him into the kitchen and firmly closed the door before she turned on him. Why must you continue to put that girl down? Larkin pulled out the chair. He sat down with a sigh. Mama, please, I don't. Dorcas wagged a finger at him. Can't you see everything she's doing around here? All the good she's brought to our door? Yet you continue to push at her. I know what she's done, Mama, he replied wearily. If anything, she does too much. I didn't want her to think that she now has to give up her evenings just because Maddie asked. His mother might believe that he was still trying to get rid of Jessie, though that wasn't his intention. The night of the dance, when he'd seen her laughing with Bill Coulter, he'd been consumed with a fit of jealousy that had stolen his breath. He'd been glad that they'd been leaving the hall because he knew that he wouldn't have been comfortable with Jessie in the sights of such a cad like Coulter. He hadn't liked the sensation of jealousy and had ruminated over it for days afterward. But it also reminded him of what Jessie was giving up by dedicating her life to them all so completely. She should have a life away from this place, he said. She's fulfilling the promise that she made to her friend, Dorcas said sternly as she set the food down in front of him. She fixed him with a firm stare. One of these days, you're going to push that girl too far, and then she'll be gone. Eat your supper, she retorted when he remained stubbornly mute. He waited until she flounced from the room before picking up the spoon. He had to force down each mouthful, knowing that he could ill afford to fall prey to any sickness so close to the end of the logging season. By the time he'd managed to swallow the last bite and climb the staircase once more, Molly was safely tucked into her bed. Peeking into her room, he saw her fiery red hair fanned out across the pillow like a vivid halo. She was nestled in the heart of a cozy cocoon she'd crafted from her blankets. He made his way along the dimly lit corridor to Maddie's room and pushed open the door. The soft glow of an oil lamp infused the room with warmth, casting gentle shadows on the worn wooden floors and chipped walls. He froze in the doorway, caught off guard by the sight that met him. Jessie, who had succumbed to exhaustion, was curled up in the narrow cot beside Maddie. Her body was a comforting contour against his small form, the pair of them nestled together in sleep's gentle embrace. It was a sight that stirred something within him. Leaning against the wooden doorframe, he was reluctant to move any further in case he disturbed her. Even in the softened light, he could discern the telltale shadows beneath her eyes. Every morning, without fail, she would be in the kitchen before anyone else. Jessie was a force unto herself, a flurry of unwavering determination and grit. She had swiftly earned not just his respect, but that of the entire lumberyard with her diligence. Despite her hard exterior, her kindness had a way of seeping through in subtle gestures and soft words. It was a compelling mix. In her sleep, a soft sigh slipped past her lips. The sound, so intimate, prodded at him. He had no right to be watching her. He should leave her to sleep. His weight moved, and the floorboard under his boot creaked. Perhaps it came from years of sleeping in an orphanage, because Mary had been a light sleeper too. But suddenly, Larkin found himself staring into the deep blue pools of her eyes. His heart stuttered in his chest when their gazes connected and almost stalled when her lips curved into a small smile. Then she closed her eyes once more and fell back to sleep. Chapter 13. The moon lay cushioned amongst the tapestry of stars overhead. Jessie stepped out onto the veranda, gently closing the door behind her. She crossed to the railing that spanned the house and drew in a deep breath of crisp mountain air that hinted at the bite of winter that would soon be upon them. Molly had described how deep the snow would get around the house once winter set in, but she found it hard to picture it, even though they'd already had their first morning frost. "Can't sleep?" she yelped as she whirled, clutching her throat. Sitting in the darkness, she just about made out the lanky form of Larkin sitting on the bench beneath the kitchen window. "Goodness," she leaned on the railing. "You scared the living daylights out of me." "Sorry," came the reply. "Are you okay?" "Yes, I am. I'm just—" She looked back at him then, when she realized how foolish she would sound if she admitted to him her true purpose for being out here. "Doesn't matter." She heard his dry chuckle and the scrape of his boots on the wooden planks, followed by the footsteps. He emerged from the shadows into the moonlight. His dark hair was mussed, and she guessed that he must have left his hat inside. "What were you going to say?" "You already think I'm 3 sheets to the wind for being here, I suppose," she shrugged. "I like the fresh air. It's so different to what I grew up with." She inhaled again and sighed appreciatively. "Every evening when I was in the lodge, I would just stand outside the door and take it all in." "I understand." She angled to look up at him then. "You do?" He placed 2 hands on the rail and gazed out across the yard, bathed in twilight. The soft light from the kitchen window illuminated his back and threw his angular face into prominence. "I sit out here most evenings," he said. "I like the quiet. Gives me time to think and to plan." Jessie leaned a hip against the rail and folded her arms. She wished that she could know what he brooded about. He was so difficult to read, and she found herself wanting to know more and more about him, even as he confounded her. The moonlight briefly bathed the yard, the rooftops of the bunkhouse and barn, showing up against the night before it slipped behind the clouds once again. Ever since Maddie had been ill, closely followed by Molly and then Martha, Jessie had become a regular fixture in the main house. Dorcas had insisted on making up one of the bedrooms for her. It still wasn't quite the same as having her own home, but she did prefer having the sounds of people around her here. "You haven't done that since you've been staying here at the lodge," Larkin murmured. "At least, not that I've seen." "No," Jessie smiled. "I didn't want to disturb anyone by moving through the house." "You wouldn't disturb the children," he said, his voice rumbling in his broad chest. "I imagine Maddie would sleep through a stick of dynamite going off next to him." She giggled. "That's true. Just this morning, I had to chivvy him out of his bed. I imagine it will be the same for church tomorrow, though, once he's up. His energy is boundless. He never stops. But he's not the only one who lives here. This is still your home, and Dorcas, of course." "It's very fast becoming your home," he said, though the usual scorn was missing. "I like it here. It's so different, and I'm not sure that I'll ever get used to the absolute quiet, but the peacefulness of the land, its ruggedness, it's awe-inspiring." He turned to look at her then, and her words trailed off as she caught the hungry gleam in his eyes. Instead of being scared, her body began to respond with a yearning of her own. The air between them hummed, and her heart leaped into her throat when he straightened up. She followed the move so that she was looking up into his face. His eyes dropped to her mouth as his hand came up to cup her cheek. His breath fanned her skin as the rough pad of his thumb traced her jaw, her lower lip. Her blood turned to molasses, and she couldn't help but lean into his touch, her body throbbing with an acute awareness of him. "Jessie?" he whispered roughly. Her eyes flew open then, her lips parting with a whimper of longing, though when the sharp dog bark broke through the silence of the night, it also seemed to bring them both screaming back to their senses. Larkin snatched his hand away and he took several steps away from her. A single look took in his tortured expression, his hands balled into fists at his sides. Jessie wrapped her arms around her middle, trying to bring a little heat back to her body in the aftermath of his stark look. She cleared her throat and crossed to the back door. "Ire," she paused, not quite able to bring herself to look at him. "Good night, Larkin." She didn't wait for a response, hurrying through the door and up the stairs to the small room. She closed the door quietly, leaning her forehead against the cool surface. "What are you doing, Jessie?" She sat on her bed, gently feeling her face where the skin still tingled from his touch. How was it possible that the man who ignited her temper so quickly could also arouse such want in her? She lay back, covering her face as her cheeks heated. A man that Mary had lain with. The shame of it bloomed in her. "You're quiet today," Martha remarked. Jessie didn't falter in the table scrubbing. "Am I?" Martha turned to look at her, lips pursed. The hearty sigh that she emitted told Jessie she wasn't fooling anyone. "And you look like you've slept less than usual. What gives?" Jessie shook her head. "I'm fine." Martha fisted her hands on her hips. "You're a terrible liar, Jessica." The use of her full name made her lips twitch, and she stopped cleaning. "Mary used to call me that when I'd annoyed her," she said. Martha simply quirked a brow, a prompt to answer the question, no doubt. Jessie pulled out a chair and sat in it. "Have you ever been in love, Martha?" "3 times," the older woman replied, sitting down opposite her. "Married 2 of them." Jessie blinked in surprise. "You were married?" Martha nodded. I married Thomas when I was 15 and Jacob when I was 22. They both died, one of influenza. The other never came back from the war." "The third?" Martha's mouth gave a wry little twist. "I'm not sure he knows I exist." Jessie blinked as her exhausted mind tried to keep up with the conversation. "Why do you ask?" "Did you love them all?" "Very much." Martha's reply was instant. "In very different ways." Jessie tilted her head. "Why don't you grab the one you love now with both hands?" "Because I am old, and sometimes a girl wants him to do the work instead." Jessie laughed then at the impatience that rippled across Martha's face. "Is it Griff?" Martha's face contorted. "Goodness, no. He's—" Martha leaned back in her chair to ensure that the living room was empty, and she lowered her voice. "He would never admit it, but everyone knows that he's sweet on Dorcas." "Who then?" Martha pushed herself up to her feet, indignation coloring her cheeks. "We're talking about you, Miss Jessie, not me. Are you in love?" When Martha froze and fixed Jessie with a look, it was as if her legs gave way and she had no choice but to sit back down. "Larkin?" she hissed. Jessie's brows met and the denial sprang to her lips, though she couldn't speak the lie. She pressed her lips together and risked a look at the other woman. "Does that make me a terrible person? To love a man who loved my friend?" Martha gave her response some thought. "I knew Mary well. She was a practical woman. She spoke of you often, and she loved both you and Larkin fiercely. I know that she'd have wanted Larkin to find love again, to be happy." "With his friend?" Jessie's voice climbed with incredulity. "And a woman he seems to despise most days? Do you love him?" Jessie clamped her lower lip in her teeth, biting down to stem the tears. The realization had come to her in the night, as she lay tossing and turning whilst her mind was in overdrive. She heard the footsteps then, as the family filed down the stairs, dressed in their Sunday finest and ready for church. Martha's fingers tapped the table, drawing Jessie's eyes to her. "We're only here for a short while, Jessie. Sometimes you just have to grab happiness with both hands whilst you can. Remember that." Chapter 14. "You were locked in a broom cupboard all day?" Molly asked, horrified. Jessie looked back over her shoulder where the young girl was sitting. "That's right," she replied. "Miss Redding was a mean old trout." Maddie shook his head. "But that's awful," Molly exclaimed. "Well, things are different in an orphanage," Jessie said. "Miss Redding told us that we weren't to feed any strays. Angela went against the rules. Your mama stepped in to protect Angela from Miss Redding's wrath, and I tried to protect your mama." Larkin reined the wagon to a stop in the lumber yard, and their dogs set up a racket to greet the family as they returned from church. He shouted at the dogs to quit their barking as he climbed down. "Miss Redding wasn't a nice woman," Jessie said. Larkin reached back and lifted Maddie down off the bench as Griff pulled the second wagon to a halt alongside them. Dorcas and Martha sat on the back bench, chatting happily. "I can't believe that she did that to you and Mama." Molly shook her head and climbed down beside Jessie. "I'm so glad that we didn't end up in such a dreadful place." "Could I have a word with you?" Larkin said to Jessie, and she almost quaked at the glint of anger she saw reflected in his cool blue eyes. Dorcas and Martha fell silent and looked at them. "Yes, of course," she said hesitantly. "Let's talk over here." Larkin suggested, stalking towards the barn, leaving Jessie to trot after him. He moved around the corner so that they were out of sight of the family before he rounded on her. Is everything? I don't want you telling my children about such dreadful tales, he said without preamble, and Jessie almost collided with him. They don't need to hear about their mother living in such abominable conditions. In fact, I don't think I want you to mention her to them again. Do you hear me? Jessie took a step back from the fury that rolled off him. What? I mean it, Larkin snapped. They don't need to know that she was beaten or starved by people. I'm sorry, Jessie began, and she spread her hands. I wasn't thinking about how it might sound to them. No, that's the problem. You don't think, do you? You like to weave your stories and chat about how hard your life was. Her brows crunched together, and she took another step back, this time at the rush of hurt that flowed through her. Larkin, I said I was sorry. It won't happen again. I don't like it when you mention her name, he carried on, throwing his arms wide. Jessie's frustration inched up. All right, but I've already told you many times that not talking about her doesn't mean that she wasn't here, you know. I know that she was here, Jessie, he shouted. I remember it all, just as I remember her taking her last breath. The rush of tears slammed into her, causing her to stumble back. That is unfair, Larkin. They like to hear stories about her life, ones that they might not have heard before. I understand that that story perhaps wasn't the right one, but I was trying to show how Mary always knew how to do the right thing. She did, didn't she? He snapped. Stop it. They both turned to the bellowing voice. Maddie stood at the corner of the house, his hands curled into tiny balls, his face red. You stop shouting at each other. Mama wouldn't like it. Maddie. Jessie was the first to recover. Honey, She walked towards him, but the little boy took off, his legs pumping as he sprinted back across the yard, past where the family was loitering. Jessie could tell by the looks on their faces that they'd heard every word. Molly was standing next to Dorcas, her face pressed into her grandmother's side. I'll go get him. Larkin stalked past her and made a beeline for the sawmill, his back a rigid line of fury. You're an idiot, Griff muttered from behind him. Larkin had returned a huffing Maddie back to the house, but had skirted around the subject of joining the family for Sunday supper, claiming that he had too much work to do. He spent the afternoon hiding out in the sawmill, the quietest place in the yard on a Sunday. Larkin straightened and sent a superior look back at his chief hand. Pardon? An idiot and a bully, Griff clarified for him. The day had gotten away from him, Larkin saw now, judging by the darkening skies behind Griff. The wind kicked at the dried leaves so that they swirled around Griff's scarred boots. You picked a fight with that girl. I saw it. Your ma saw it too. She's done nothing but try and comply with you, tiptoeing around you in case she says the wrong thing to set you off. You're an idiot. Griff folded his arms and glared at him in a belittling way that only a man of Griff's age and experience could. You're out of line, Larkin muttered, but without heat. He'd been berating himself ever since they'd returned from church. I don't much care about lines, but I care when you're pushing away the best thing that's happened to this family ever since Mary Patrick arrived here. Guilt exploded inside him, hot and sharp. Larkin rounded on Griff. I can't hear her name, Griff. Certainly not from the woman that I... Griff's bristly brow lifted. That you? Never mind, Larkin said, turning his back to his employee. Leave me be. Boy, you're dumber than a box of rocks sometimes. You keep on pushing that girl, eventually, she's going to give up and leave. And I know that that's not what you want her to do. Isn't it? It would be better all around if she left. The children are doing much better now. Because of her. Yes, I suppose, Larkin admitted reluctantly, though we would have got through it eventually. What has gotten into you? Griff threw his hands wide. I swear I'd get more sense out of a wall. She is good for all of us. You should do right by her and marry her. Larkin rounded on Griff. Don't talk crazy. I don't love her. How can I? I knew love, Griff, and that's not what this feels like. I can barely look at her without guilt consuming me. Griff growled in exasperation and stomped back through the door of the sawmill with a muttered, Idiot. Larkin threw the hammer in his hand. rejoicing in the resounding thud it made against the wooden walls. He wanted Jessie to leave. At least then she would take this nagging ache for her away when she did. Chapter 15. A brisk wind snapped at her skirts, teasing loose strands of hair that had escaped the confines of her pins. The wild expanse of the mountains filled her senses. Tall pines and stately aspens, swaying in the wind, held a wintry chill that was more of a promise than a threat. It stirred the trees into a soft, rustling symphony, as if the branches shared whispered secrets with each other. The mighty mountains, steadfast and unmoving, bore their crowns of fresh snow with regal grace. Behind their formidable silhouette, gray clouds burgeoned with the weight of rain that filled the air with its damp fragrance. Jessie followed the path from memory. Mary's grave was tucked away in a quiet corner of the Spriggs land. She had visited only once before and realized now that her time had been filled with carrying out her promise. She laid down the sweet William blooms that she'd managed to collect before the snow killed them off, in front of the marker of Mary's grave. "Hello, Mary. I tried," she whispered, her fingers trailing along the cross. "But I fear my presence here is causing more harm than good. I'm sorry that I'm unable to fulfill my promise to you. No doubt you would dig your heels in and stay, but then you always were the stronger one of us both." The first hesitant drops of rain kissed the ground, a gentle patter on the dried leaves crunching underfoot. "Your children are truly beautiful people. I know you would be so very proud of them both. I fell in love with them as soon as I saw them. But," she closed her eyes, sending the tears that filled her eyes down her cheeks, "I fell in love with him too, and I'm not sure that—" Her tears choked off her voice and she folded to her knees. She wept for the loss of her friend, for the guilt that choked her happiness and filled her now that she knew that she loved Mary's husband. Larkin trudged to Mary's grave. He was taken aback to find Jessie already there, her figure bowed in quiet sorrow. He hesitated. From this angle, he could see that her cheeks were wet with her tears, a silent testimony of the depth of her pain. Seeing her so bereft made something twist painfully inside him, a reminder that she too missed his wife, her friend, with a grief as potent as his own. Wordlessly, she straightened, wiping her tears away with the back of her hand. "I'm leaving," she said. Her voice wobbled but held firm. "I can come back," he said. "I didn't mean to intrude. No, I meant that I'm leaving Copper Creek." The words hung heavy between them. "Why?" he managed to ask. She cast a pleading look to the skies, her hands coming up and then dropping heavily back down. "I thought that keeping Mary's memory alive for Molly and Maddie would help them," she admitted, her voice laden with resignation. "But I can see now that it won't work. It's too painful for you. Maybe for me." Larkin stared at her. He'd told himself that he'd wanted her out of his life, but seeing the anguish in her face made him want to hold her. And that scared him. "I never wanted to replace her, Larkin. I told you that no one ever could, and I meant it," she continued. I want them to remember how extraordinary their mother was. Please tell them that." "Wait," he began when she turned and began to walk back. Where will you go?" "Dorcas has written me a letter of recommendation. I'm going to head for Wyoming, I think. I have enough for a train ticket, accommodation, some food. It's enough. A fresh start for us all." She looked at him then, the imploring look in her red-rimmed eyes squeezing his chest. "I'm sorry if I ever caused you any heartache. That wasn't my intention. Can I write to them?" "Jessie," Larkin began, torn between what was right and how he felt. She patted the air. "You're right. A fresh start," she bobbed her head. "Well, thank you, Larkin. Goodbye." Larkin watched her retreating form until it was swallowed by the landscape. He told himself it was for the best. He looked down at the pink and purple flowers he had brought to place on Mary's grave, sweet williams, her favorites. There, lying on the grave, was an identical posy. The startling realization washed over him. Jessie had loved Mary just as much as he had. He set the flowers down on the grave and patted the marker gently. "Thank you, my love," he murmured before he turned and hurried after Jessie. By the time he caught up with her, the rain fell in heavy drops and slapped at the ground. She had passed by the house and was almost at the road. "Jessie, wait!" he shouted, relieved when she stopped to look back. A frown creased her brows as she stood there watching him. She knuckles away her tears. "What's wrong?" Larkin stopped, the rain turning to mists that clung to the trees. Now that she stood before him, his courage waned slightly. She brushed back the wet strands of her hair and shook the drips from her fingers. "Larkin, I don't want you to leave," his words tumbled out. "I don't." The cold air turned her sigh into a cloud in front of her face. "I can't stay here, Larkin. It's too much. Please, Jessie, let me explain." She blinked, swapping her carpet bag into her other hand as she waited. He took a step closer. "I thought that losing Mary would be the hardest thing I ever went through. I miss her every day. Just hearing her name on the lips of others used to hurt, but it's been easier since you got here." "I don't understand then," Jessie said in exasperation. "If talking about her is making things easier, why do you shut me out and push me away? We have much in common, and yet you treat me as though it's all my fault." "It's not your fault, it's mine." He advanced again. "Mary was the best of me. She knew my moods. She could turn me around, and she fought me every step of the way. I loved her, and I miss her every day." "I miss her too. I'm scared," he said. The sight of this woman, who against all odds had become a beacon of hope and strength for his children, stirred something profound within him. Her mouth twisted. "Of what?" "Of how I feel for you, in case it eclipses what I had with Mary, because when I'm with you, I am consumed. With jealousy when I saw you talking to Bill Coulter, and with anger when I think about Robbie Peters making a pass at you, with pride when I hear how the townsfolk speak about you." He came to a stop in front of her, his eyes roaming her pretty face. He reached out and touched her face, his voice rough with emotion. "With a need to touch you whenever I'm near you, that it drives me crazy, and I can't stand it. And I'm consumed with a love so strong when I see the way you are with my children. I love you, Jessie. I have fought it every step of the way, but I think from the moment I saw you in my kitchen, something inside me was kicked awake again." Her eyes drifted closed as she leaned into his touch, and fresh tears mingled with the rainwater. "Larkin," she whispered, her voice as rough as his, "it's too hard." "What is?" "Being here with you," words tumbled from her mouth. "The guilt I feel because you what? I can't say it." "Don't leave me, Jessie, please. I need you here. We need you," he said and framed her face in his big hands. "Look at me." She did as he asked. His heart lurched at the emotion that shone brightly from her. "I can't promise it will be easy." "I can be grouchy and hard-headed," he said, and rejoiced at the watery smile that moved over her mouth. He tilted her head back, searching her face. "I need to hear you say the words." "I love you," she breathed. His forehead met hers, and he sighed. "Thank you." "All I want is for you to let me in, Larkin. I didn't come here to fall in love, but I have, and I can't bear to know that my presence here is causing pain." "It isn't. I will do better," he said, "starting today." He closed the gap between them and aligned his body to hers. "Stay here with me and be my wife, Jessie. Let's build a future for as long as we have one, because tomorrow isn't promised." She met his gaze and nodded. That's all he needed to see as he claimed her mouth with his. In the rain, he swept her up in his arms and carried her back to the lodge, making fresh promises of their own for a future as yet untold. The end.